Hi everyone. Tonight we begin with the life as a follower of Joan of Arc. A world of mud-caked boots, smoke-thick air, and rain-soaked banners cutting through the gray sky. Far from the glory sung in songs, these were days spent marching through endless fields, sleeping wherever dry ground could be found, and carrying faith heavier than any sword. So, while you're getting comfortable, feel free to tap like and subscribe if this kind of calm, late-night history is your thing. And I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. Drop a comment with your city and what time it was when you pressed play. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sky presses down low over your head, thick with gray. It doesn't look like it plans on clearing anytime soon. You don't wake up to the sound of trumpets or clashing swords. You wake up because something cold is soaking through your blanket again. Another puddle, another dawn on the road. You shuffle upright, rubbing grit out of your eyes, trying not to think about how many days it's been since you last felt dry. They told you before you joined. Following Joan wasn't all about visions and banners. It was mud everywhere. Mud in your boots, in your bread, caked behind your ears. Right now, it's weighing down the bottom of your tunic, making it feel like you're dragging a sack of stones behind each step. Around you, the camp stirs. There aren't many tents. Most of you sleep rough, curling up in whatever dry corner you can claim. Horses snort, already restless. Someone nearby curses quietly as they try to relight a damp torch, the flint refusing to catch. You hear a familiar voice, one of the younger boys groaning as he stretches. Not again, but it is again. It's always again. The thing is, following Joan isn't like following an ordinary captain. With a captain, you might get clear orders, a day's rest between marshes, proper rations if you're lucky. With Joan, it's long hours on your feet, because she said the saints told her to keep moving, and no one questions the saints. Or at least, not loud enough for her to hear. Some days, you get lucky and ride. Today is not one of those days. Your horse is being used by someone with more gold buttons than you, so you walk. Step after step, squelching forward, eyes narrowed against the rain that drips steadily off the edge of your hood. Ahead, through the mist, you spot it. That flash of white silk moving just slightly brighter than the clouds around it. Joan's banner, always ahead, always just far enough to make you want to speed up. It doesn't make sense, really, that a teenage girl should hold all your attention like this. But when she walks, everyone watches. There's something steady about her, quiet even when the whole company's groaning and slipping on the road. Her voice isn't loud, but it carries. And when she raises that banner, well, even in all this mess, it makes you straighten your back just a little, mud or not. By mid-morning, your legs are starting to feel like logs. That's the thing about medieval roads. Road is a generous word, more like a series of wagon ruts strung together by a thin line of hope. When it rains, and it always seems to rain, the ruts turn into trenches. You're not walking so much as waiting. You glance down. One of your boots is coming loose again. The leather's half rotted from all the damp. If you take it off now, there's a good chance you won't get it back on. So you grit your teeth and keep moving. At least the air smells clean in its way. Wet earth, wood smoke from some distant village's chimney. If you pretend hard enough, you can almost forget how badly everyone smells. Because yes, here's a lesser-known fact. They don't really talk about hygiene on these marshes. Soaps for feast days. Most days, you're lucky if you don't reek of old sweat and whatever died in your last ration sack. Joan doesn't seem to care. You catch glimpses of her, sometimes riding, sometimes walking beside the others. Her armor isn't fancy. It's simple, functional. What's strange is how clean she somehow stays, at least cleaner than you. Probably has something to do with that white surcoat over armor, makes her stand out even when everyone else looks like a bundle of mud and old cloth. Your stomach growls around noon. There's no midday meal waiting, just whatever you can chew on as you walk. For you, that means hard bread tucked under your tunic for warmth. It's supposed to be a loaf, but after 3 days in the rain, it's more like brick dust. You gnaw on it anyway. No one complains about the food out loud. Complaints tend to earn you extra duty. Or worse, get passed up next time there's a chance to ride instead of walk. Not that walking isn't good for you. Some older soldier mutters nearby. Builds character, builds patience, builds blisters the size of a chicken's egg. You believe it. By the time evening starts creeping up, the mud has gone from brown to nearly black. Your legs ache all the way up to your hips. You keep moving because everyone else does. That's how it works in these companies. You move with the flow, like a flock of very tired, very muddy geese. The banner is still ahead, waving just enough to show you the way. That's the thing. Joan never lets it drop, even when the rain's coming sideways, even when her face looks just as tired as yours. That's what people say keeps them going. Not orders, not gold, the banner. Somewhere along the way, it hits you. Nobody's singing. Usually on long marches, soldiers hum or whistle. Today, just boots squelching and the occasional cough. It's like everyone's saving their strength. Or maybe everyone's quietly wondering the same thing. How much longer until we see battle? Because this isn't just a march for the sake of marching. You know where you're headed. Orleans, the siege, the real thing. And while you might be tired and wet, and absolutely done with this particular patch of road, you can't help feeling something cold and sharp sitting in your stomach. The kind of feeling that says, today is just mud and rain. Tomorrow it might be arrows. Evening doesn't so much arrive as gradually thicken. The rain softens into a fine mist that clings to everything. Your hair, your cloak, the worn leather of your belt. And when the sun finally disappears, there's no dramatic sunset. Just a slow fading from dull gray into heavier black. You don't stop marching because someone calls it. You stop because the horses stop and the banner stops. And that's as official as orders get tonight. The ground beneath your boots is still mud, still waterlogged. But you know from experience that standing still for too long is worse than settling down quick. So you look for a patch, somewhere not directly in the path of horses, not too close to the latrines, which, frankly, is just a fancy name for a particular tree everyone agrees on, and not already claimed by someone who'll get loud about it. Tonight's lucky spot? A strip of half-frozen grass under a tree with no leaves left on it. You wouldn't call it comfortable, but you'll take it. You drop your pack, if you're lucky enough to have one. Some don't. Some carry everything they own strapped to their belts. A knife, a wooden spoon, maybe a rosary tucked under their shirt. You've got a bit more than that. An extra pair of hose wrapped in oilcloth to keep them dry, and a hunk of salted fish wrapped in linen, so old it's more holes than fabric. Now, here's where things get creative. Sleep in a soldier's camp isn't like sleep back home. You don't unroll a bedroll and stretch out like in the stories. No, you curl up however you can. You hunch into yourself to keep warm. Some guys sleep sitting up against trees. Some wrap their cloaks around their heads entirely, hoping to block out the damp. And of course, there's the lice. Nobody tells you about the lice before you sign up. They come with the uniform. Little biting things that live in the seams of your shirt, especially around the collar. When you lie down, they wake up. You'll feel them eventually, crawling along your neck, looking for a warm patch of skin. You scratch without even thinking about it, just like everyone else does. It's an unspoken rhythm in the camp. Scratch, shuffle, mutter a prayer, scratch again. Fire helps. If you can get close to one, the smoke keeps the bugs away for a while. But tonight, the rains made firewood scarce. There's one pit going in the center of the camp, mostly thanks to Joan's commanders and the few better equipped captains. You watch the light flickering off steel helmets and damp plumes, but know better than to get too close unless invited. Instead, you huddle with the others, common soldiers, the half-paid, the barely fed. You don't all talk, but you share warmth the way animals do, pressed close, shoulder to shoulder, knee to knee, breathing in each other's sour wine breath, trying to ignore the smell of damp wool and sweat. Sleep doesn't come all at once. It creeps up on you while you're half awake, fingers wrapped around your belt to make sure nobody slips your dagger while you're under. You close your eyes, feel your body ache in a dozen places, and listen. There's always noise in camp. Someone's always muttering a prayer. Tonight, it's a voice somewhere behind you, repeating the Ave Maria in a low, scratchy whisper like a chant. Over and over, until it blends with the snort of horses and the distant rustle of wind through wet leaves. There's another sound, too, a clinking of mail. Someone walking the camp perimeter, checking posts. You hear the quiet slap of boots in mud, the soft scrape of steel on steel as a weapon's adjusted. It should make you feel safer. It doesn't really. It just reminds you that there's danger out there. English scouts maybe. Or worse, nothing at all. No clear enemy, just the long, cold stretch of waiting. You drift somewhere between awake and asleep like that, half aware of the world pressing in around you, the cold seeping into your bones, the way your knees don't quite straighten out, and always that dull ache where your boot's been rubbing raw all day. Now, historians like to write about medieval camps as lively places. Music, dice games, laughter around fires. Maybe that's true in some armies. But with Joan, with her quiet focus, her insistence on prayer and discipline, things feel heavier, quieter. There's not much gambling here. No bawdy songs tonight. Just the steady whisper of prayers and the occasional creak of a wooden cartwheel shifting under its own weight. A lesser-known detail. There's no set watch system here. At least not in the way modern armies would have. It's more like an honor system. You take your turn if asked, or you sit up late because sleep won't come, staring into the mist with your hood pulled tight, hoping nothing looms out of the darkness. You find yourself doing that now, sitting up, cloak wrapped tight, eyes half open, watching the firelight flicker through the mist. And somewhere in the middle of that, between scratch, shuffle, shiver, you spot her. Joan. She doesn't sleep like the rest of you. At least, not that you've seen. Most nights, she's either praying in her little tent or walking the camp's edge, speaking quietly with her captains. Her figure's easy to spot, even in the gloom. That white surcoat again, like a ghost moving through the mud. You don't know what she prays for. Victory, maybe. Or protection. Or just enough strength to keep going one more day. It's a strange feeling, watching her while the rest of the camp slumbers in its awkward, uncomfortable way. You wonder what goes through her mind. Whether she's scared. Whether she thinks about the same things you do. Blisters, lice, bad bread, cold feet. Somehow, you doubt it. Historians still wonder, even now, just how much of Joan's energy was real grit, and how much was put on for the sake of her followers. Was she really that tireless? Or did she sneak her own moments of sleep somewhere nobody noticed? You pull your cloak tighter and settle back down, letting your head rest against the rough bark of the tree. It's not sleep, exactly, but it's the closest thing you're going to get tonight. The mist curls around your boots. The fire burns lower, and the camp breathes quietly as one big, muddy, exhausted creature waiting for dawn. Dawn doesn't arrive gently. It grinds its way into camp like an unwelcome guest, slow and gray, dragging a heavier chill with it. There's no sun breaking over the hills, no golden light warming your face. Just a dim, sullen sky that makes everything look slightly worse than it did the night before. Your eyes open to the sound of movement, Boots squelching again, men coughing, a horse somewhere snorting as it stamps the ground for warmth. One of the captains is already shouting, voice rough from sleep, or maybe from too many prayers spoken too loudly the night before. It doesn't matter what time it is. You know what time it feels like. Hungry time. Here's the thing. After a few weeks on the march, hunger starts to feel like a permanent companion. You don't get proper meals out here. Forget hot stew or fresh bread like back in the village. Out here, you get siege rations. That's what everyone calls them, even when you're not technically under siege yet. Because Joan's company is always heading toward a siege, toward Orleans, toward a city where food will become even scarcer than it already is. Breakfast is, well, breakfast is a generous word. It's whatever you've got left. You fumble in your pack for that last piece of hard bread, the one you tucked away days ago. Pull it out, knock a few crumbs loose, and look it over like you're inspecting a battlefield relic. The thing is solid. Hard enough to knock someone out with if you threw it at their head. And yet, you chew. Slowly, carefully, bite by bite, letting your jaw do the work of a hammer and chisel. Bread like this doesn't dissolve in your mouth. It stays bread, stubborn and dry, long after you swallow. If you're lucky, someone nearby shares a flask of wine. Not the rich kind from the court, obviously. What passes for wine out here is sour, half vinegar already, but it softens the bread enough to keep your teeth from cracking. One sip, then another. The sharp sting of it cuts through the fog in your head. You'd complain, but honestly, at least it's something warm in your stomach. That's the rhythm out here. Bread, wine, and whatever dried peas or salted fish survive the journey. No fresh fruit. No vegetables. If you get a bit of onion, it's practically a holy day. You glance around camp. Some men are boiling water over small fires, hoping to make it stretch. Water's always boiled, partly to make it safer, partly just to make it feel like soup, even if it's nothing but warm water with maybe a scrap of old meat bone thrown in for flavor. There's something called potage. It's common in camps like these, a sort of thick, grayish porridge made from whatever grains left. Oats, millet, beans. Mostly it tastes like wet cloth, but it fills your gut, and that's what counts. It's also a good way to cover up the taste of flour that's gone a little off, which happens more often than anyone cares to admit. Someone nearby is gnawing on a hunk of salted pork. The smell hits you, a mix of fat, salt, and something vaguely rancid. You don't even flinch. Your stomach's learned to deal with worse. The thing about siege rations isn't that they're terrible. It's that they never really satisfy. You eat until your jaw aches, but the hunger doesn't go away. It just settles down for a nap, waiting to wake up again in a couple of hours. By mid-morning, the company is moving again. Same road, same mud, but now there's the added weight of that gritty bread sitting in your belly like a stone. You don't complain. Not out loud, anyway. Complaining means extra duties, hauling firewood, fixing wagon wheels, patching torn banners. Speaking of banners, there it is again. Joan's white standard moving ahead like a lighthouse in a sea of gray. You can't help but look at it, especially on days like this, when the sky is low and your spirits are lower. One of the older soldiers walking beside you mutters a quiet joke. Think she eats the same as us? His voice is dry, lips cracked from wind and salt. You don't answer. Truth is, nobody really knows what Joan eats. You hear rumors that she fasts for days, that she refuses meat, that she only drinks water blessed by priests. Could be true. Could be just another campfire story. But there's a funny kind of comfort in those stories. They make the bread taste a little less bitter, make the wine go down a little smoother. Around midday, the company pauses near a copse of trees. Another quick meal. Another round of whatever's left in your pack. This time, it's peas. Not fresh peas, obviously. dried and boiled until they're more paste than vegetable. You scoop them into your mouth with a rough wooden spoon, licking the back of it when you're done just to get every last bit. That's another detail the books don't always mention: how much of a soldier's day revolves around food. Not just eating it, but thinking about it, dreaming about it. You could spend hours imagining a roasted chicken, a hot loaf of bread straight from the oven. But out here, that's dangerous thinking. Makes the real stuff taste even worse. So you focus on the task at hand. March, eat, march again. Afternoon stretches long and quiet. The road winds through patches of forest and open field. Sometimes you see villagers watching from a distance, huddled in doorways or behind fences. You wonder what they think, seeing this ragged line of soldiers trudging past, soaked and bent under the weight of too little food and too many weapons. By the time camp is made again that night, your stomach is hollowed out all over again. Same ritual. Find a spot, drop your gear, check your pack. Bread's gone now. Wine's nearly empty. Just a handful of peas left. You chew slowly, sitting by the edge of a smoky fire, watching the shadows flicker across damp faces. That's when you hear it. Someone nearby, maybe a younger recruit, whispering under their breath about Orleans, about what the siege will really mean. Because here's the truth. Siege rations out on the road are bad enough. But once you reach the city, once the walls close in and supplies run low, things get worse. Much worse. There are old stories. Tales of soldiers forced to boil leather belts just to have something to chew. Of rats cooked over open flames. Of entire companies wasting away while waiting for relief that never comes. Historians still argue over how much of that is true. Were things really that desperate during the siege of Orleans? Or is it just another layer of legend added on top of Joan's already impossible story? Either way, it sits in your mind as you chew that last pea. A quiet, knowing thought. Hunger as constant as the mud under your feet. And as the sky darkens again, folding the camp into shadows and whispers, you lean back against your tree, stomach empty and eyes half closed, waiting for whatever tomorrow's rations will bring. By the time the towers of Orleans finally loom in the distance, rising like gray teeth above the fog, your legs feel like hollow sticks. No part of you is dry. No part of you is rested. But something shifts in the air around camp, nervous energy running like a quiet current through every soldier's shoulders, every whispered prayer, every glance toward the city ahead. This is what you've been marching toward. The siege. The thing that's been muttered about over campfires for weeks now. The English have the city ringed in with wooden palisades and siege engines. You can see them from a distance. Long frames like skeletal fingers, catapults and trebuchets already set up, aiming at the same city walls you'll soon be standing beside. But what's strange isn't the enemy. It's the way the French camp changes. You expect a sudden surge of unity, brave faces, rallying cries. Instead, you notice it's quieter than before. Soldiers standing in small knots, not talking much. Men sharpening blades in slow, thoughtful silence. Some of them avoid looking at Joan altogether. It's like everyone suddenly remembers how odd it is, being led by a teenage girl who claims to hear saints. When it's just mud and marching, it's easy to go along with it. But now, with arrows already flying in the distance, with real death waiting on the horizon, those quiet doubts start slipping through the cracks. You hear them yourself that evening, while setting up camp near the city's edge. Two soldiers nearby, older men, faces grizzled, leather armor worn thin, talking in low voices. She's brave, sure, but is it enough? The English don't care about banners or visions. They care about steel. You keep your head down. You don't join in. But the thought sits in your gut alongside the last scrap of hard bread from the march. Heavy, unsettling. The next morning, things move quickly. Joan's commanders Dunwa, La Hire, men who've seen too many battles already, gather for whispered conferences. Orders fly from tent to tent. Bows are checked. Arrows counted. And here's a lesser-known truth about sieges. Before the grand attacks, before the ladders and the storming of walls, there's always this quieter phase. The harassments, the little raids. Small groups sent to poke at enemy defenses, test the lines, wear down their patience. That's what you're part of today. One of those early pushes. Your breath steams in the cold morning air as you line up with the others. A row of half-armored, half-exhausted men clutching spears and bows, faces pale in the early light. Joan rides near the front. Her banner flickers bright white against the gray sky. She's speaking to the captains again, her voice calm, steady. And for a moment, you feel it. That strange pull. That quiet certainty that maybe, just maybe, she really is touched by something bigger. Until the first English arrow falls, you don't hear it coming. You only hear the solid, meaty thunk as it buries itself into the dirt 2 paces from your boot. Then another, then 10 more. Suddenly, the air is filled with that sickening hiss. Dozens of arrows slicing down from the enemy palisades. You duck instinctively, raising your shield, eyes wide as wooden shafts bury themselves all around. There's shouting. Orders barked half in panic. Men guiding behind carts, scrambling into ditches dug hastily the night before. And through it all, there's Joan, still standing, still holding the banner. She doesn't flinch, doesn't duck. That's the part you'll remember most later. The way she stands so still, while arrows drop like rain around her. It's like watching someone hold up a candle in the middle of a storm. And somehow, impossibly, the flame stays lit. But even as you watch her, you feel the doubt clawing its way up again. Because no matter how calm she looks, you can't help but notice the way some captains hesitate. The way men glance sideways at each other instead of forward. Not everyone believes anymore. Some grumble under their breath. She's just a girl. The king sent her to keep us busy, not to win. Historians still wonder if this was the point where morale really began to split. When half the army followed Joan out of loyalty, and the other half simply followed because there was no other choice. The arrows keep coming in waves. You crouch lower, fingers aching from clutching your shield so tightly. Around you, arrows thud into the earth, into carts, into unlucky men who cry out and collapse, clutching shoulders or legs. There's no grand charge today. No banner-waving victory. Just the grim work of survival. Eventually, the English fire slows. Someone blows a horn, French captains signaling retreat. And you pull yourself up, legs shaking, head ducked as you shuffle back behind the nearest rise. Later that night, camp feels even quieter than before. You sit by the edge of a fire, staring into the embers, picking splinters out of your tunic from where arrows cracked against your shield. Someone nearby speaks up again, half a joke, half a truth. She stands tall, sure enough. But she doesn't have to stand in front of the arrows like we do. You glance up. Across camp, Joan sits by her tent, still in armor, still holding quiet counsel with her captains. And all you can do is wonder, does she really not feel it? The fear, the doubt, the weight pressing down harder than any iron helm? Or does she feel it just like you do, but hides it better than anyone else alive? The wind picks up, tugging at the edge of your cloak. You pull it tighter, staring into the flames until all you can see is flickering red and black. Tomorrow will bring more arrows. That much you know for certain. The next day begins not with marching or rain, but with silence. One of those strange, heavy mornings where even the crows in the trees seem to be holding their breath. You wake already dressed because you didn't really sleep. Nobody did. Half the camp spent the night huddled against damp wagons or curled beside the faint embers of dying fires, eyes half open, listening to the wind push quietly through the grass. You get up, brush the grit from your cloak, and stretch legs that feel stiffer than they should. Everything smells of cold ash and old wool. Today is different. Today isn't about raids or testing the lines. Today, Joan's voice carries across camp clearer than usual. We go forward. That's what you hear, spoken firm and quiet, like she's saying something as simple as naming the day of the week. And that's when it really hits. Today is an assault day. Not a feint, not an arrow skirmish. Today, there will be ladders against walls. Today, people will fall. You help gather the gear, coiled ropes, thick wooden shields, bundles of arrows tied together in worn linen. Everyone's moving fast now, not out of panic, but with that grim, focused energy soldiers get when they know the moment's finally arrived. As you walk toward your place in the line, boots already sinking into the mud, your eyes keep drifting to the banner. Joan's banner. It waves steadily ahead, bright white against the gray dawn light. That long strip of fabric, marked with holy symbols and faint gold stitching, catching the wind just enough to pull slightly at her grip. It's funny. Of all the things out here, swords, spears, war horses, that banner is what keeps your feet moving. Not the armor, not the orders, not even the promise of pay. Just that piece of cloth, fluttering high where everyone can see it. The assault begins with horns. Deep, bone-shaking blasts from conch shells and wooden trumpets. Then shouts. Then drums. You push forward in a crush of bodies, mud flying, feet stomping through waterlogged earth. And there it is, the English palisade rising before you like a wall of sharpened stakes and heavy timbers, bristling with archers. The first arrows fall almost immediately. They don't come in neat, movie-like arcs. They come in messy, chaotic bursts. Some hiss past your ear. Some slam into shields. One catches the man 2 paces to your left in the thigh, sending him down with a cry. But you keep moving, because everyone else does. Joan's banner leads the way, held high even now. You glimpse her through the smoke and mist, riding close behind the front line, and then it happens. The moment the banner wavers. It's not a dramatic fall. It's just a flicker, a sudden shift in the fabric's rhythm. 1 second steady, the next caught by a gust of wind, jerking sideways. Or maybe it's not the wind, maybe it's Joan herself. Because right then, as you glance up through the crush of bodies and mud, you see her lean slightly in the saddle, her hand tightening on the shaft, her face pale. It's quick, barely a breath, but everyone feels it. The line stutters. A handful of men glance toward her instead of forward. Someone calls out, not in a commanding tone, but like a question. Is she hurt? Because if Joan falls, if the banner truly wavers, what happens next? Historians still argue about that exact moment. Some say she took an arrow through her shoulder right then. Others claim she was simply repositioning. All you know is what you saw, the fabric flickering, her grip tightening, and for just a heartbeat, the line of men in front of you slowing down like a great machine grinding to a halt. But then, just as quickly, the banner rises straight again. Joan lifts it high, her voice cutting through the noise like a clear bell. Forward, and the line surges once more. You press into the wall of English defenses, hands grasping for rope ladders, shields raised against fresh volleys. Everything becomes mud, wood, shouts, steel. Your own memories blur here. A flash of someone's helmet spinning through the air. The sting of splinters in your palm from grabbing a rough plank. But through it all, that white banner stays just within sight. That's the thing about belief. It doesn't need to be constant. It just needs to return when it matters most. By the time the assault pulls back, hours later, you can't feel your legs anymore. Your arms ache from holding your shield. Your mouth tastes like iron and old bread, but you're still standing. And so is Joan. Later that night, when things settle again into that half-silent camp rhythm, you find yourself sitting near a low fire, scraping dried mud from your boots with the edge of a dagger. Someone speaks nearby. A captain, maybe. Quiet enough that only a few people hear him. She wavered. It's not an accusation. Not quite. More like an observation. You don't answer. Because you don't know what to say. Yes, the banner wavered. But it didn't fall. And somehow, that's enough. The road doesn't feel like the same road anymore. It's the same stretch of mud. The same ruts. The same cold wind blowing through wet grass. But without Joan at the front, everything feels heavier, slower. The banner is gone. No white silk flickering ahead. No quiet prayers being murmured as she rode by. Just boots dragging through the mud and soldiers hunched deeper into their cloaks, as if pulling themselves smaller could somehow make the silence feel less sharp. Joan was captured. Everyone knows it now. Some heard it straight from a captain's lips. Others just picked it up through the usual camp whispers, passed from mouth to mouth like a cold. Nobody saw it happen directly. One moment she was charging ahead toward Compiègne's gates. The next, pulled from her horse, grabbed by the enemy. No rescue. No last stand. Just gone. You'd think there would have been shouting, orders to fight back, a rush to bring her home. But there wasn't. The company froze. The captains stared at each other. And then, quietly, someone called for a retreat. Now, the only sound is boots and cartwheels. The food has run low again. Whatever siege rations you had tucked away are long since chewed down to dust. One of the captains passed around a sack of dried beans last night, but there wasn't enough to go around. You take to chewing strips of old leather from your belt, just to keep your jaw moving. Even the fires burn smaller now. At one camp along the road, a soldier tries to start a prayer aloud. Ave Maria, like Joan always said before a march. But the words feel strange without her there. His voice falters halfway through the second line, and nobody picks it up. That's how it goes now. Quiet, half-finished things. The sky doesn't help. It's all gray again. Low clouds sitting heavy over the trees, making everything feel closer, more pressed in. You don't sleep much. When you do, it's that light, jumpy kind of sleep soldiers get after too many nights of bad news. You lie back against a tree trunk, cloak pulled tight, eyes half open to watch the shapes moving near the fires. Always counting faces, always wondering who'll be gone by morning. More men peel away every day. Some leave in twos or threes. Others just vanish between camps. No shouts, no arguments, just quiet exits. And nobody blames them. Without Joan, there's no reason to stay. No siege, no holy mission. Just a collection of tired men carrying whatever's left in their packs, walking back toward places that might not even want them. It hits you, somewhere between one camp and the next, just how strange it feels not to have an ending. You always pictured things finishing with a grand moment, victory or defeat, something sharp and clear. Instead, there's just this walking, and then the rumors start. Someone says she's been taken to Rouen. Someone else claims they've already begun her trial, that she's being kept in a stone tower, that she's been offered a way out if she confesses. Nobody knows what's true, but the name starts appearing again, now in quieter voices. Joan. You catch it while refilling your water flask at a stream. Two captains murmuring to each other in low tones, faces shadowed under their hoods. One of them makes a sign of the cross. By the time the road bends toward Rouen, the company is thinner than ever. Less an army now, more a long, strung-out line of men in mud-streaked cloaks and worn boots, carrying shields that haven't seen fresh paint in months. And ahead, you see the walls. Tall gray, lined with guards. Rouen. You know she's inside. You know things aren't finished yet. Not with swords, not with banners, but with questions, with trials, with quieter kinds of battles, which brings us slowly, carefully, to the next part of this journey, the trial of Joan of Arc. You find yourself standing at the edge of Rouen, almost without thinking about it, like your boots carried you there on their own. The city is gray from the first step in. Gray stone, gray sky, gray faces under linen hoods. And above all that, looming like a fortress wrapped in silence, are the walls of the prison. It isn't a grand castle with banners and music. There's nothing regal or noble about it. It's just a block of cold stone rising out of the mud and rain, blank-faced and unmoving, tall enough that even the chimneys of the city seem to bend around it. Nobody invites you closer. There are no crowds gathered out front, no priests leading vigils. The place is just there, heavy, watching, waiting. That's where Joan is now. You know it the same way everyone knows it, by the simple, quiet fact of her absence everywhere else. She isn't in camp. She isn't on horseback. She isn't riding at the head of any charge. She's inside that block of stone. The walls themselves aren't smooth like in stories. Up close, they're rough, patchy, covered in moss where rain has soaked deep. You stand across the street, your back pressed against a tavern's outer wall, hood pulled low against the drizzle. Your boots ache from days spent walking just to get here. But standing still now, your legs feel even heavier somehow, like they aren't quite sure what to do without the rhythm of marching. Around you, Rouen goes about its day in slow, cautious layers. Merchants pulling carts through puddles. Apprentices sweeping shop fronts with brooms twice as tall as they are. A woman walks past with a basket full of bread, her eyes flicking toward the prison for just a second before she looks away again. Nobody lingers too close, not unless they have business inside, and even then, you can tell it isn't the kind of business anyone brags about. A captain's voice drifts past your ear. Two men in leather riding cloaks speaking in low tones, arguing quietly about court orders, about who's been allowed in to speak with her. One swears she's under guard day and night, chained at the ankles. The other claims she refuses food unless it's blessed. You listen, but you don't interrupt. There's nothing to add, because the truth sits in front of you already. Tall, cold, and silent. The prison walls feel older than the city around them. You know from camp gossip and stray scraps of stories that it used to be part of a fortress, before the war, before the trials. They say some parts date back to Roman times, that the stones remember things. You wonder, staring up at those high, narrow windows, whether any of those memories ever get out. You shift your weight from foot to foot, stamping a little warmth back into your toes. It's not bitter cold, but the kind of steady damp chill that seeps into your bones slowly, like a bad thought that never leaves. At some point, a priest walks past you. Black robes, white collar, face pinched like he's carrying too many secrets. You watch him until he disappears behind a wooden door, marked with a simple iron cross. Someone nearby murmurs that it's the bishop's court that's holding her, not the king's men. That makes it worse somehow. There's no battlefield out here, no banners, just questions, ink, and words twisted into knots sharp enough to cut skin. You glance up again, no movement, not a single flutter of cloth in those deep window slits. You wonder what her cell looks like. You picture it small. Stone walls, no straw on the floor. Iron rings bolted to the floor or walls. Maybe a single flickering torch if they're feeling generous. But you don't imagine light pouring in. Not in a place like this. And even more than what it looks like, you wonder what it sounds like in there. Does she hear the bells from the cathedral nearby? Does she hear the merchants shouting? Or is it just silence, so deep and thick it presses against her like armor? Historians still debate exactly how Joan was kept, whether she was guarded by men or watched by church officials, whether she was treated like a prisoner of war or something altogether different. You don't know the answer. All you know is the way the stone feels under your hand when you brush your fingers against it, cold as river water. One soldier you recognize from the march stops beside you, cloak dripping with rain. He doesn't speak at first, just stands there. Then, after a long pause, he says quietly, "Doesn't feel real, does it?" You shake your head. No. And that's all there is to say. The two of you stand there until the bells ring out from the cathedral tower. Low and slow, counting out the hour in long drawn-out tones that seem to echo against the stone walls like waves against a cliff. When the bells fall silent again, so does everything else. Ruang moves on in its careful way. A child laughs somewhere in the distance. A cartwheel creaks over loose stones, but none of it touches this corner of the city. Eventually, you pull your hood up tighter and turn to go. Not because you want to, but because standing there any longer feels like trying to hold up the sky with one hand. As you walk away, the prison stays behind you, gray, silent, unmoved. But even with your back turned, you can still feel it pressing against you. The weight of walls that hold not just a person, but a story waiting to decide how it ends. The hall where Joan is held during her trial is nothing like the muddy roads or smoky battle camps you remember from before. It is colder than any battlefield, quieter than any army camp, and heavier in a way that has nothing to do with stone walls or high ceilings. You stand just inside the archway, blending in as best you can among the servants and lesser officials allowed to linger. The floor is worn smooth from centuries of footsteps. Dark wooden beams stretch above your head, and narrow windows let in thin gray light that doesn't seem strong enough to reach the center of the room. In that center sits Joan. No armor now, no sword at her hip. Her hair has been cut short, almost boyish, the uneven edges falling around her face like rough wool. She wears a plain tunic, simple cloth, with no sign of the white banner or shining steel plates that once made her seem larger than life. Her hands rest in her lap. Chains circle her ankles. It isn't a dramatic kind of captivity. No cruel iron spikes, no racks or visible threats. Just quiet chains, quiet questions, quiet power. Around her sit rows of churchmen and clerks, robes of black and gray, faces pale in the light, all watching her the way men might watch a dangerous animal in a cage, fascinated, careful, waiting. At the front, presiding over it all, the Bishop of Beauvais leans forward in his high-backed chair, voice steady, eyes sharp beneath the weight of his authority. His scribes hunch over parchment, quills already scratching before Joan's first answer leaves her mouth. The questions begin with formalities: name, place of birth, parentage. But they do not linger there long. Soon enough, they dive into the heart of it, her visions, the voices, the purpose of her battles, why she chose to wear men's clothing, why she carried a banner. It is as if the trial is less about proving guilt and more about wearing her gown, layer by layer, breath by breath. You watch her as the hours pass. Her voice is quieter than you remember it from the camp. No bold orders, no rallying words. But it carries in the hall nonetheless. Calm, unshaken. Each answer given as though she has already repeated it 100 times to herself. The voices told me. God guided me. I did as I was commanded. And every answer seems to frustrate the men questioning her. Because no matter how they phrase it, no matter how many times they circle back, Joan's story does not change. There is no heat in her voice, no trembling, just that steady, quiet certainty. You wonder how she holds on to it, sitting there in the center of so many sharp eyes, so many pens ready to catch any misstep. You imagine standing in her place and feel your throat tighten with the thought of it. But Joan never falters. When they press her about the saints, demanding names, faces, details, she tells them as clearly as if she were reciting a prayer. Saint Catherine, Saint Margaret, Saint Michael. Her words fall into the still air like stones into water, each one sending ripples that never quite settle. And still, they keep asking. The questions come in waves. When did the voices first speak to you? Did they instruct you to take up arms? Did they tell you to crown the king? Were these voices truly divine, or were they sent by darker forces? Were you ever promised personal glory? Over and over, dozens of times, each question slightly twisted from the last, designed to catch her out, to make her stumble, to find some gap in the story. You watch the scribe's hands moving without pause. It is strange to think that while Joan sits there defending her soul, these men record her words like merchants writing down the price of barley or wool. Ink on parchment, each letter pressing her story into history, whether she survives it or not. Outside the hall, the city of Rang carries on. You can hear it faintly through the thick stone walls. Carts creaking, merchants shouting, a muffled ring of bells. But inside, the trial room feels closed off from time itself. No sunlight moves across the floor. No shadows shift. Just candlelight flickering along wooden panels, painting the same pale faces again and again. At one point, someone demands to know about her clothing. Why she wore men's armor. Why she refused dresses even after capture. Joan's answer is as steady as before. It was my safety. It was my command. Her words stir something quiet in the room. Not anger, not approval, just a sharper kind of listening. And then comes one of those rare moments when the questioning slows. The bishop leans back slightly, exchanging a look with one of the other judges. They whisper, quills still scratching. It is not a pause for her sake, you know that. It is a pause for theirs, to gather more precise angles, sharper words, to decide how best to continue the chipping away. Historians later debated just how many questions Joan answered throughout the trial. Some records say over 1,000. Others argue fewer. But standing here now, you believe the higher number. You feel it in the rhythm of things, in the scrape of chairs as clerks adjust themselves, in the quiet murmur of Latin prayers, whispered under the breath of a nervous monk in the corner. As the afternoon wears on, Joan begins to look paler. Not weaker, just quieter. Like someone walking uphill for too long without stopping. Her hands never clench. Her voice never breaks. But you see it in her eyes. A shadow of exhaustion settling in around the edges. Not fear, not anger, just sheer bone-deep weariness. And still she answers. When asked whether she would deny her voices to save herself, her answer is clear as a church bell. If I deny them now, I lie. That line sits in the room long after the next scribe starts writing. It sits in your chest, too. Heavier than all the banners, all the battles. By the time they finally call the session to a close for the day, the hall does not erupt into conversation. There is no applause, no relief. Just the soft scrape of benches, the shuffle of feet. Clerks roll up parchment scrolls. Candles are snuffed. And Joan stands, chains clinking faintly, her figure smaller than you remember, but no less steady. As she disappears back through the narrow side door, the space she leaves behind feels larger somehow, emptier. The questions are finished for now, but the weight of them hangs in the air like smoke after a battle. Thick, lingering, and very far from over. You wake to the sound of bells ringing across Rouen. Not celebratory, not mourning, just loud enough to gather attention. Somewhere above the rooftops, the gray sky hangs low over the city, pressing down like a damp wool blanket. The streets are already beginning to stir with movement, cloaks brushing against stone, boots echoing on uneven roads. Today, everyone seems to be walking in the same direction. You follow without fully knowing why. Someone near you whispers it. Joan will appear in the square. Not for battle, not for a rallying cry. For something different. The Place du Vieux Marche isn't wide, but today it feels like the center of the world. Wooden scaffolding has been erected overnight. Nothing elegant, just a platform made of roughly nailed boards, enough to raise someone a few feet above the crowd. You arrive early, securing a spot near the back of a barrel cart, the wood slick from morning mist. The crowd continues to gather. Soldiers stand at the edges of the square, spears in hand, but no one seems inclined to move forward. No one cheers. No one speaks louder than a whisper. It's the kind of silence that wraps around your shoulders, heavy and uncertain, as though everyone knows they're about to witness something important, but no one knows what to call it. Then she appears, Joan, but not as you remember her. There is no shining armor, no banner, no bold voice raised above the din. Instead, she walks slowly, flanked by guards, wearing a plain gray tunic and a stark white cap tied neatly beneath her chin. The cloth is unadorned, stiff in the wind, and somehow more startling than any helmet she ever wore. You've seen her in battle. You've seen her walk barefoot through muddy camps, kneel in prayer before charges, ride through hailstorms with a banner that seemed to float above the chaos. But this is different. This version of Joan is stripped of command, stripped of steel, standing alone in front of hundreds who once believed in her or feared her, or both. The bishop begins to speak. His voice is flat and unhurried, the kind of tone used to read official decrees no one expects to challenge. His robes are clean, his hands folded precisely, and the scroll in front of him lists her crimes in measured, methodical Latin, heresy, pride, dressing as a man, speaking with spirits, leading men into war without the church's approval. At each word, the accusations build like layers of stone, turning Joan from soldier to criminal, from chosen to condemned. You listen, but it's hard to hear past the sound of your own breath. You look at her face, searching for something familiar in the pale stillness. Her gaze is steady, pointed somewhere between the bishop and the sky above him. She doesn't cry. She doesn't fidget. She simply stands, hands clasped, ankles lightly bound, the white cap hugging her face like a final frame around a portrait someone's already begun to erase. Then the scroll is lowered. The bishop turns, speaks quietly to the priest beside him, and the crowd leans in slightly. A parchment is held out toward her. You can't read it from here, but you already know what it says. It's an abjuration, a formal recanting of her claims, a confession of sorts. If she signs it, she acknowledges the church's authority, rejects her visions, promises obedience. In exchange, her life. Not freedom, not dignity, but life. There's a long moment where nothing happens. Even the crowd seems to freeze. The breeze shifts the edge of her tunic, and the white cap pulls slightly tighter under her chin. You expect her to speak, or to turn away, or to look toward the crowd for support. But she doesn't. Slowly, without ceremony, she lowers her eyes, reaches out, and takes the parchment. She signs it. That's all. She signs. And just like that, the girl who once rallied armies is no longer a warrior. She becomes, in that moment, a penitent. Not because of the paper, not because of the words written on it, but because of the white cap on her head, as plain and final as a closed door. That cap, more than any chain or verdict, marks her fall. It's the clearest message the church could send. She has submitted. She is now to be seen not as a leader, not as a martyr, but as a lost soul brought back to obedience. You want to believe it's a choice, that she did this to survive. But part of you knows too well, that survival in Rouen comes with a price. And for Joan, the price is belief. The crowd doesn't cheer. They don't cheer either. There's no joy in the air, no finality. Just a strange, unsettled silence, as if no one knows how to feel. You scan the faces around you, some blank, some pained, others simply confused. And Joan? She steps down from the platform without a word. The guards guide her gently this time. Not roughly, not like a criminal. more like a patient being led back to her bed. The crowd parts before her. You watch her walk past, and no one speaks to her. No one reaches out. Later that evening, back near the chapel, where you sometimes find a place to sit and listen to the bells, you overhear two clergymen in quiet conversation. One of them speaks with a frown. She wore the cap, but the eyes still unbroken. That stays with you, because you saw it too. The cap was on her head, the paper signed in her hand, but nothing in her expression said defeat. There was no collapse, no crumbling, only a strange, exhausting steadiness. Historians still argue about what truly happened that day. Some say she recanted willingly to save her life. Others claim she was tricked, that the document was altered, or that she didn't fully understand what it meant. But you were there. You saw how carefully she read the page, how slowly she took the pen. You don't think she was tricked. You think she knew. And you think that, even then, part of her still believed enough to hold on to something small and invisible that none of the priests could reach. The next morning, the bells ring again. The city continues. Markets reopen. Bread is baked, but something feels different now. You notice fewer people walk past the prison. The white cap has done its work. It has told them Joan's story is over, or at least that they're meant to stop watching. But you can't stop. You pass the prison wall again before dusk. There's no sound from inside. No candles in the windows. No hint of the girl who once stood with mud on her boots and fire in her voice. And yet, when you close your eyes, all you can see is the weight of that white cap, resting on her head like a crown turned inside out. It's not raining the morning they bring her out again. That feels wrong somehow. You wake expecting gray skies, the kind of steady drizzle that soaks through your boots and makes the world feel like it's mourning along with you. But instead, the sky is flat and pale, streaked with early summer light, dry and almost warm. It's the kind of weather you'd expect for a market day, not for something like this. You're already moving toward the place du Vieux Marche before the bells finish their first toll. The crowd is larger this time. Word spread faster than it should have. Whispers in taverns, sharp glances in bakeries, quiet mentions between soldiers cleaning armor that hasn't seen use in weeks. No one needs to be told what's about to happen. They feel it. By the time you arrive, the square is ringed with wooden platforms and soldiers, posted at regular intervals. There are no market stalls today. No bread sellers or children chasing after stray dogs. Just people. So many faces gathered in silence, layered behind cloaks and hoods and caps, all looking toward the center of the square where the wood has been stacked. You've seen fires before. Sieges, campfires, even pyres built for burning the bodies of the fallen after battle. But this feels different. The platform they've built isn't large. High enough to see from all sides, wide enough to hold the stake and a careful, deliberate pyramid of kindling and logs stacked in a neat square. Someone had to place each piece by hand, and you can tell by looking at it, this was done slowly, carefully, not rushed. The guards appear first, their boots thudding heavily against the boards, carrying long spears, faces flat and professional. And then, after them, Joan. She walks between two priests, her hands bound loosely in front of her, her face pale but calm. That same white cap still tied beneath her chin. The same simple tunic. No chains clinking loudly, just a quiet rustle of cloth against the wooden platform as she steps up beside the stake. You don't see her struggle. You don't see her flinch. Her eyes move slowly over the crowd, over the faces gathered in tight rows, all the way to the far end of the square. And as her gaze passes over yours, just for a breath, you feel the weight of it. Not anger, not pleading, just quiet. The bishop's voice rises again, reading from a scroll so long it almost brushes the floor. Heresy, relapse, apostasy. The words tumble one after another, like stones dropped into a river. leaving ripples that stretch outward through the gathered city. You notice small things while he speaks. A woman nearby holding her child's hand too tightly. A merchant's apprentice clutching a cap to his chest like a shield. Soldiers standing straighter than usual, gripping their spears just a little too hard. There's no shouting, no riots. Just silence, held tight between clenched jaws and white knuckles. When the bishop's voice finally trails off, the crowd holds its breath. One of the priests steps forward to offer Joan a final chance. A whispered word you can't hear, a quiet offer to confess once more. She shakes her head. The motion is small, barely a tilt of the chin, but it's clear. And then the fire is lit. You expect the crowd to react, to cry out, to fall to their knees. But nothing happens at first. There is only the soft crackle of dry wood catching flame, the first thin tendrils of smoke rising into the pale morning air. The fire does not roar. It builds slowly, in steady waves. Yellow and gold curling around the base of the stake, licking up toward Joan's feet, and through it all, the silence holds. You stand there, breath caught in your throat, watching as the smoke thickens. It catches the light in strange ways, turning the sky hazy and soft-edged like a painting left out in the sun too long. There are no final speeches, no curses, no sudden dramatic cries from Joan. If she speaks, her words are lost beneath the crackle and hiss of flame. Historians still argue about that, what her last words were. Some say she called for Jesus. Others claim she cried for her king. But you were there. You saw her mouth move, yes. But whatever she said was carried away on the smoke before it could reach the edge of the square. You remember one thing clearly, the smell. It isn't as sharp as you expected. Not like burning wood alone, nor like the fires from siege camps. It's heavier, thicker. It fills the air, sticks to your throat, makes your eyes water not from tears, but from sheer weight. And still, no one speaks. The entire square stands in silence as the fire does its work. Even the priests step back, their faces unreadable. You stand there until the flames begin to die down, until the wood collapses inward on itself, sending a fresh shower of ash up into the air, until the platform is nothing but smoldering black and gray, glowing faintly red at the edges. When it is finally over, the soldiers move first, stepping forward to clear the platform. The crowd begins to shift. People turn slowly, as if waking from a long sleep, their boots scraping against the stones in quiet unison. No one says Joan's name, not out loud, but you can feel it hanging in the air around you, as if the city itself is holding on to it. Later, as you walk back through Rowen's twisting streets, the smell of smoke still clinging to your cloak, you pass small groups of people gathered in doorways, heads bowed together in hushed conversation. You hear a few words repeated more than once. The girl is gone. The maid is gone. But is she? Because as you reach the edge of the city and look back one last time toward the market square, the smoke is still rising in a slow, steady line. And you can't help but think it looks less like the end of something, and more like the beginning of a story no fire could fully burn away. The first time you hear her name spoken again, years have already passed. You're no longer a soldier. You've hung up your boots somewhere quieter, somewhere with a roof that doesn't leak, and a fire that burns without needing constant attention. The war isn't over. Not really, it never is. But your part in it feels like it's finished. Or at least that's what you tell yourself on quiet mornings. And yet, somehow, Joan's voice finds its way back to you. It doesn't happen in a grand cathedral or some official royal court. It happens in a tavern, a plain wooden place tucked along the Seine, where the benches creak when you sit down and the wine tastes half of vinegar and half of dust. You're there for the same reason everyone is, because it's warmer inside than out, because there's nothing better to do on a damp winter night. Someone near the fire starts talking. A group of men hunched over a battered chessboard, speaking just loud enough to carry through the low hum of conversation. They say she never recanted. Not really. One voice is scratchy old, but steady. You glance over without meaning to. Said she died with her banner in mind, if not in hand. White as linen, straight as judgment. It catches you off guard, hearing Joan spoken of like that. Like she isn't just a chapter in some bishop's record, but something still alive in the air. You sit back, listening, not moving. The words keep coming. Stories half remembered, told in pieces. She spoke of saints, even at the end. They say the king himself wept afterward. I heard a priest kept one of her letters, hidden away in his robes. You don't interrupt. You just listen, feeling the weight of it settle in your chest all over again. Because these aren't the clean, careful lines scribes wrote down in dusty halls. These are rough-edged memories, carried from soldier to soldier, tavern to tavern, the kind of truths that no parchment can hold steady for long. A few weeks later, you hear it again. This time outside a church in another town, a place smaller than Rouen, quieter. You're standing beneath the eaves, watching the rain slide down the roof tiles in long, thin lines, when a boy recites something under his breath. The maid said, "If I am not in God's grace, may he put me there. And if I am, may he keep me there." It's strange, hearing her words in a child's mouth, like a prayer or a charm meant to ward off storms. Historians, you imagine, would argue about that, about what Joan truly said, about what was added later. But standing there in the rain, you don't care much for historians. You care about the weight those words carry now, drifting through the years, finding new mouths, new corners to settle in. Later still, you pass through another town, years after Rouen. The banners in the square are different. The faces, the king's seal stamped on gates, it all changes. But not her name. You hear it again. This time from a merchant, arguing over the price of wool. Joan would have said fair price for all. And there it is again. Echoed not as law, not as scripture, but as something softer. A thread running through everything. Even among soldiers, the name lingers. One night by a campfire outside Reims, you share a flask with men younger than you now. Fresh faces too young to remember the sieges, the marshes. And yet, as they pass the flask around, one of them leans in and says it plain as prayer. My father told me of the maid, said she spoke like no one else. Said she could make a man stand up straighter just by standing near him. You don't add your story. Not then. You just let the words hang there, warm against the cold night air. There's a strange kind of comfort in it, knowing that even without banners, even without battles, Joan's voice keeps moving. Not in books or scrolls, but in simple things. In tavern whispers, in market arguments, in the hush before church bells ring. And sometimes, walking alone along a road that looks very much like the ones you once marched with her, you catch yourself remembering things she said. Things she shouted over the clang of armor and the crack of arrows. Forward. Have no fear. In God's name. Simple words, but they sit in your mind like stones in a river, unmoving even as years rush past them. There's a quiet evening much later, years further on, when you find yourself sitting beside a stone bridge at dusk, watching the river roll beneath it. The sky is pale blue, streaked with silver clouds. The kind of sky that doesn't press down on you, but lifts you up just a little. You close your eyes for a moment, and without thinking, you say it aloud, just to hear how it feels in your own voice. If I am not in God's grace, may he put me there. The words don't echo. They just settle, quiet and steady, into the air around you. That's what remains, you think. Long after fires burn out, after trials end, after kings forget. It isn't banners or swords or scrolls. It's the words people carry forward. Words that shape how they stand, how they speak, how they remember. And you, without planning it, carry them too. Years pass quietly, as they tend to do when the banners stop waving and the swords are set aside for quieter work. At first, there's still talk in every town square and under every chapel roof. Talk of battles won and banners raised, of saints and visions, and kings crowned by a peasant girl in armor. But slowly, like the last embers of a campfire burning down to ash, those stories grow softer. Fewer voices speak them. Fewer faces light up at the mention of her name. It happens slowly, but you notice it. You travel again, moving from village to village, city to city, less as a soldier now and more as a man trying to understand what remains. Along the roads of France, there's less hunger than before, fewer burned houses. The land feels as though it's healing. Market stalls stand fuller. Church bells ring more steadily. Villages no longer huddle behind their gates at sunset. You hear more laughter than crying. But as you walk, there's a new kind of silence that settles in the gaps between conversation. Joan, her name is no longer sung in taverns, no longer whispered over candles lit in dark corners of chapels. One autumn morning, you find yourself approaching Chinon. It's not deliberate. Your boots simply carry you there, the way habits do after enough years. The city looks cleaner now, its walls patched and repainted, its streets washed by quiet rain. Banners in blue and gold hang from windows, silk instead of linen, unfrayed by battle. Soldiers guard the gates with polished armor and bright sashes, not the muddied tunics you remember. You step through the gates and pause beneath the arch, taking in the view. Chinon has always been proud, but now it feels like something sharper. Polished pride. A city that has chosen which stories to remember and which to fold away quietly, like an old tunic left at the back of a chest. You walk up through the winding streets toward the royal fortress, past merchants calling out the price of salted fish, past women in bright cloaks walking arm in arm beneath canopied awnings. No one looks twice at you. No one would guess you once marched under a white banner, boots heavy with mud and faith. The fortress stands tall, its stone cleaned until it looks pale as bone in the late afternoon sun. You stand for a long while outside the main gate, listening to the slow creak of the portcullis as a wagon rolls through. Beyond, music drifts on the wind, strings and flutes, light as morning fog. Inside, the great hall smells of beeswax and old wood. Tapestries stretch from floor to ceiling, their colors so bright they almost seem unnatural. Deep reds, shining golds, blues so rich they pull at the eye. You walk slowly beneath them, boots scuffing against flagstones worn smooth by years of court processions. At the far end, Charles VII sits in painted stillness. His portrait, hung above the main dais, shows him seated on a throne draped in red velvet, one hand resting on a sword's pommel. His face is calm, regal, satisfied. Behind him, the artist has painted rivers and forests, rolling hills and bright skies. But there is no sign of Joan, not even a white scrap of banner tucked into the background. No whispered memory captured in brushstrokes. You stand there for what feels like hours, staring up at the image of the king she crowned. You remember the muddy roads, the long marshes, the prayers whispered before dawn. And yet here, in this hall of silks and soft music, it is as though those days never happened. For several days, you linger in Chinon, walking its streets and sitting at the edges of its quieter rooms. You listen in the courtyards, in the cathedral cloisters, in the long echoing hallways where courtiers speak in voices low and clipped. You hear about trade routes, about new taxes, about royal weddings and shifting alliances. But never once do you hear Joan's name. You ask no questions. There's no need. The silence speaks loudly enough. One evening, as the sun dips low behind the fortress walls, you find yourself standing beside an old clerk in the record room. An ancient space lined with shells and scrolls, the air smelling of dust and old ink. The clerk's hands tremble as he stacks a bundle of documents. but his voice is clear when he speaks. They offered him the chance, he says, not looking at you, the king, to pay her ransom. Before Rome, before the fire. You don't answer. You already know the rest. He said nothing. The clerk continues. No coin, no rider sent. The scrolls slip from his hand, and you bend to help him gather them, eyes lowered against the sharp weight in your chest. Historians would debate it for years. Was Charles VII cautious or cowardly? Did he choose silence for Francis' sake, or for his own? Standing there in that shadowed room, you don't need debate. You feel it as clearly as you ever felt the weight of a sword in your hand. It wasn't fear or wisdom. It was forgetting. Deliberate, quiet, heavy as stone. You leave Chinon the next morning, walking through streets already alive, with merchants calling out the price of apples and bread. Children race past with wooden swords, laughing too loudly, their voices carrying on the wind. You step aside to let them pass, your boots striking softly against worn stones. You do not look back as you walk beyond the city gates. There is no need. You already know what remains there. Polished marble, banners in bright silk, and silence. But as you walk, with the road stretching out before you in golden light, you carry her name with you. Not as a banner raised high, not as a battle cry shouted across fields, but as something quieter. A weight folded into the fabric of your cloak. Because even as kings forget, the roads remember, the villages remember, the quiet voices of soldiers gathered around low fires remember. And somewhere beyond Chinon's shining walls and silent halls, there are places where her story still lingers. Places where her banner is not painted on grand canvases, but carried in whispers between market stalls and chapels. Not erased, not silenced completely, simply waiting. You don't remember the exact moment you first noticed it, the way Joan's banner moved through the air like something alive. You'd seen banners before. Every captain carried one. Every noble family stitched their colors onto fabric meant to wave above battlefields. But none of them caught your attention quite like hers. There was something about that white cloth marked with golden thread, lifting against the wind, that stayed with you long after the mud had dried on your boots. Now, years after the fire in Rouen, long after the courts and their silences, you find yourself walking familiar roads with unfamiliar faces. The war may have quieted, but it hasn't ended. New lords rise, old enemies shift alliances. And yet, in every village you pass through, from crumbling fortresses to small riverside chapels, there's always someone who mentions the same thing in a hushed voice. The banner. They don't speak of her name so loudly anymore. But the banner? That's a story people feel safer sharing. It always starts the same way. A soldier you share bread with by a campfire mentions it casually. I saw it once, flying above the walls at Orleans. Or a priest wiping down pews leans in and whispers, "There was a white banner, wasn't there? Saints upon it, in gold thread?" And always, as they speak, there's a certain faraway look in their eyes, like they're picturing it in the smoke of the past, still there, still waving. The thing is, you remember it too, not in grand colors or fine details, but in fragments caught between sword blows and shouted orders. In those long, slow moments between one breath and the next on the battlefield, when everything seemed to slow down, the banner would appear just at the edge of your vision, sometimes through actual smoke, thick and choking, rolling across a siege camp or curling from burning wagons. You'd see that white fabric, impossibly clean, lifting high above the chaos. And somehow, despite all the noise and panic, your feet would keep moving toward it. That's what you carry with you now, not the weight of kings, not the rusted memory of battles already turned to dust, but that flickering shape above the crowds. In one town, near Beauvais, you find yourself seated in a tavern where a rough tapestry hangs from the wall. It's nothing fine, simple cloth, faded from years of smoke and sun, but in the center, there's a shape stitched in pale thread. A white banner with faint gold lines. No words, no saints. Just the shape of it, waving against imagined sky. You ask the tavern keeper about it. A man with hands rough from chopping wood and hauling barrels. He shrugs once, wiping his hands on a cloth. Been there longer than I've owned the place, he says. Someone left it here years back. Said it was for the maid. The banner again. Not her name, not Joan, but the banner. You sit with that thought long after your drink has gone cold. And as evening settles over the village, with smoke curling from chimneys and stars appearing one by one, you can't help but picture it all again. Those marshes through fields blackened by fire, those long, ragged lines of soldiers moving through the mist. And always, somewhere ahead, a flash of white through the smoke. What's strange is how clearly you remember the sound of it. Most people wouldn't think banners made a sound, but in the right wind, through the right weight of fog and ash, you could hear it, a soft snapping, like cloth, catching just enough tension to pull against itself. Quiet, barely there, but present. You walked through more than one battlefield like that, head down, shield up, only to look up at the right moment and see it lifting ahead of you, pulling forward like a lighthouse in a storm. And you weren't the only one. Years later, in the corner of a monastery garden, you share a bench with a former captain. Old now, hands twisted with the ache of age, voice slow and careful. He doesn't speak much anymore. But when you mention the banner, his eyes sharpen in a way that feels like waking up from a long sleep. Never saw one like it, he says. White as snowfall. Didn't matter how black the sky got. You could always see it. You nod, saying nothing, letting the memory settle between you both like a shared cup of wine. Historians, of course, would write things differently. They'd say it was just fabric. Ordinary linen dyed bright to catch attention. But they weren't there. They didn't walk through the rain and fire, didn't stand ankle-deep in mud with their breath burning cold in their lungs, while looking for that one flash of color that meant not just orders, but hope. And it wasn't always the front lines either. You remember nights where the campfire smoke hung low over the tents, where men sat cleaning weapons by candlelight, too tired to speak. Even then, if Joan passed through the camp, that banner would be there, carried by her or one of her pages, lifted high above, even when there wasn't a battle to fight. It wasn't about showing off. It wasn't about claiming territory. It was about keeping people moving forward, one step at a time, in a world too often filled with mud and fear. You see it now as you walk along empty roads, years later. Not the real thing, but in glimpses, cloth hung in chapel windows, flags waving from farmhouses, even a pale sheet caught on a laundry line twisting in the wind. That shape, that movement, that memory of white against gray. And each time it makes you pause, just for a moment. Because even if no one says her name anymore, the banner still moves. It's out there, somewhere beyond the fog. You don't remember the exact hour it happened. Battlefields blur like that. After enough days spent trudging through mud, cold air heavy with the weight of breath and blood. But you remember the feeling. One moment, the white banner was there, lifting above the crowd, clear as the moon cutting through storm clouds. And then it wasn't. It wasn't as though someone shouted it. No cry rose up from the men. No horn signaled its fall. It simply vanished. You were near the rear lines that day, standing ankle-deep in churned earth soaked through with more than rain. The smoke was thicker than usual. Arrows hissed through it like hornets. You could hear the usual sounds. Captains barking orders, the low groans of injured men trying not to call out. But above all that, your eyes kept searching for it. The flash of white and gold. Joan's banner. It had always been there before. No matter how grim things turned, it never dipped. Even when she wasn't at the front, one of her pages carried it, held high, so the men wouldn't lose their step. And that day, For some reason, it didn't rise back up. You thought at first it was just the smoke. A wind shift. Maybe a horse cutting through the lines at the wrong angle. But minutes passed. You caught sight of flags, blue ones, red ones, but no white. At first, no one spoke of it. Superstition, maybe, or habit. Soldiers don't talk about bad luck until after the battle's done. But as the fight stretched on, you could feel it traveling through the ranks like a cold wind slipping under a door. No better, it wasn't the same as losing a captain or seeing a line break. It was subtler than that. Shoulders hunched a little lower. Men took smaller steps. Their shields dipped just a little, eyes flickering toward the sky like they were searching for some sign that hadn't come. Historians might write that it was lost in a charge, dropped when a rider fell. Others say it was captured. But standing there, boots stuck in the mud, you knew it wasn't as simple as that. It felt like it had been taken, quietly, without noise. Like it had chosen to vanish rather than be captured. After the battle ended, the search began. Quiet at first. No captain made it official, but you saw it in the way men combed the field long after the fighting had died down, stepping carefully between fallen bodies, lifting broken lances and shattered shields. Looking for white linen among all the wreckage. You joined them, kneeling in the dirt, brushing aside ash and splinters. You found other things, a broken spear with its point sheared clean off, a helmet dented so badly it no longer looked like armor, but no banner. The fires were still burning by the time the captains gave the order to pull back. No one had found it. Some men said nothing, faces pale and closed tight like fists. Others whispered prayers in Latin, hands twisting rosary beads they hadn't touched in months. You walked from the field with your boots heavier than usual, not from mud, but from the quiet thought pressing into the back of your skull. What happens when the thing that kept you moving is gone? That night in camp, no one sang. Not even the usual muttered songs soldiers hum while oiling armor or chewing on hard bread. The fire crackled. Men sat shoulder to shoulder under their cloaks, eyes down. Even the horses seemed quieter, shifting in their ropes without snorting. Some said maybe Joan herself had taken it, ridden off into the fog with it tucked beneath her arm. Others, darker at heart, whispered that its disappearance meant the end, that whatever force had once walked beside them had finally turned its face away. You sat with your back against a wagon wheel, staring into the fire until it blurred like stars caught in rippling water. And still, no banner. Days turned into weeks. Battles continued. Lines shifted. But no matter how many flags were raised, no white and gold appeared again. Other standards flew. Local lords' colors. The king's seal. But the white banner was gone. You heard stories crop up, of course. Months later, a merchant claimed he'd seen it folded inside a chapel in Bourges, hidden behind an altar. A soldier you met on the road said his cousin saw it nailed above a gate in Paris. But each time, when you followed the trail, there was nothing. Just empty walls. Chapel priests shaking their heads slowly. Merchants too eager to change the subject. It wasn't just lost. It was vanished. And yet, you couldn't bring yourself to fully believe it was gone forever. Not really. Because even without the cloth in front of you, its shape stayed in your mind. Every time the wind caught a loose flap of canvas in camp, every time a sheet hung from a laundry line, for a moment, just a breath, you saw it again. White, gold, lifting high above the smoke. The strange thing was how the army kept moving, even after it was gone. Men still fought, sieges still rose and fell, but there was something missing underneath it all, like a song missing its last note, like a prayer said without quite believing it would be heard. Once, sitting near a chapel's outer wall, in a village too small to be named on any map, you shared a bench with an old knight. His hands shook too badly now to hold a sword, but his eyes were sharp enough still. "It never came back," he said, voice rough as dry bark. "That banner, I saw it the day it vanished." You nodded once, not needing to ask which day. "I keep thinking," he added after a long silence, "maybe it's better that way. Maybe it was never meant to end up hanging in some hall." You thought about that long after he left. About how some things shouldn't be folded away under glass. Some things should stay on the wind, half remembered, seen only in the corner of the eye, as if they might still return when most needed. And so, the banner remained, gone from the field, but never fully from the world. In the years after the wars settle into treaties, and the last fires gutter out along abandoned battlefields, you begin to notice how Joan's banner lingers, not in official records or royal halls, but in quiet corners and whispered conversations. No one raises it over fortress walls anymore. It doesn't hang in the king's court beside golden lions or bright fleurs de lis, but it has not vanished completely. Instead, it lives on in a different way, moving through monasteries and marketplaces, as softly as smoke curling through an open window. You first hear of it in Chartres, outside the main abbey, standing beneath the arches of a cloister while resting from a long day's walk. The monks there speak in measured tones, their voices drifting like echoes through cold stone hallways. Two of them, bent over stacks of parchment and pots of fresh ink, murmur to each other as if sharing a quiet secret rather than mere news. "I saw it once," the older one says, dipping his quill into a shallow pool of ink. "The maid's banner, white, stitched with gold thread." The younger monk frowns slightly, glancing up from his copying. "That was years ago. They say it's hidden," the elder continues. "Beneath the South Chapel altar, you stand listening, head lowered, pretending to examine the worn patterns carved into a stone pillar. It isn't the first time you've heard the story, and it won't be the last. As you travel north and east again, through towns quieter now than they ever were during the marshes, the rumor follows you. It curls beneath conversations in market squares, passed between merchants as easily as sacks of flour or bolts of linen. Always the same shape to the tale. A white banner with gold embroidery, hidden away after the trial, protected by someone too cautious or too reverent to let it fall into silence. In Tours, standing near a wool merchant's stall, you overhear it once more. The merchant leans across his counter toward a customer, voice lowered so only those closest can hear. "They say it was seen again," he murmurs. "South, near Limoges, hung from the rafters in an old chapel, only shown on feast days." You do not interrupt. You do not press for more. You simply watch the merchant's hands, thick and calloused, smoothing a fold of rough-spun cloth. The way he says it, calm and practiced, makes it clear this is not the first time he has shared the story. It becomes a kind of quiet habit after that. Wherever you go, whether stopping to mend your boots in a cobbler's stall or resting outside a chapel on a warm afternoon, you listen for it. The banner always appears, not in plain sight, not held proudly in a lord's hall, but somewhere just out of reach, hidden behind altars, folded in locked chests, hung from quiet rafters only on the holiest days, glimpsed by a handful of trusted eyes. You hear it in Rouen, years after Joan's ashes have scattered and the square where she was burned has grown cold. In a tavern there, sitting by the hearth with your hands wrapped around a wooden cup, you listen as a group of soldiers pass the story along between rounds of dice. Their voices are low, faces turned away from the fire. They carried it north, one says. The Burgundians hid it in some tower near Arras. Too dangerous to keep it out in the open, another adds. Best to let it fade. You say nothing, only sip slowly, the heat of the drink anchoring you in the moment. There's a rhythm to these tales now, half truth, half memory, all stitched together like the banner itself. What strikes you most is how careful everyone is with it. No one boasts, no one claims ownership outright. Lords do not speak of it. Captains do not hang it from their tents. It lives, instead, in the quieter spaces. In chapels where the stones still remember her footsteps. In market stalls where old women selling bread whisper of saints and miracles, alongside prices for flour. Once, outside Bourges, you meet an old knight seated beneath the arch of a cathedral door. His armor is dulled by time, but his eyes remain sharp beneath heavy brows. You sit beside him without speaking, sharing the same silence until, after a long pause, he speaks first. I saw Ignatish. You glance at him then, waiting. The day it disappeared from the field, he continues slowly, voice rough as dry wood. I was there, and I've been looking for it since. You do not ask whether he means to find it for himself, to carry it again in battle, or to see it folded in peace upon some chapel wall. It does not seem to matter. His words settle into the air like stones dropped gently into water. Somewhere along the way, the question becomes less about where the banner is now, and more about why its story continues at all. If the wars are quieter, if the king no longer speaks her name, why does the memory of that white cloth persist? You think of it each time the wind catches a sheet hanging from a cottage line, or when smoke curls from a blacksmith's roof just so, rising in a shape that seems almost familiar. White and gold, lifting against the sky. There are no scrolls recording its last resting place. No royal archivist tasked with preserving it. Yet still, it exists, if not in fabric, then in memory. One evening, near sunset, you stop in a village so small it barely warrants a name. There is a chapel here, stone and wood fitted together with care, but no great wealth. Inside, a single candle burns near the altar. You kneel, resting your hands lightly on the worn wood of the pew in front of you. And as you look up, you see it. Not the banner itself, but a painting, faded from years of smoke and dust, nearly hidden behind soot-blackened walls. There it is, a white flag with golden shapes traced faintly upon it, held aloft by a figure rendered in simple lines. No face is shown. No name is painted beneath. Only the banner remains. You rise quietly, stepping closer, and let your fingers rest against the rough stone near the painting's edge. It does not matter whether it is a true likeness or an artist's guess. What matters is that it is here, that someone, at some point, chose not to forget. And so the banner remains, not just as cloth carried into battle, but as something softer and more enduring. As a memory passed between hands, like a relic no king can own. As a whisper in markets, as a prayer in monasteries. As long as someone speaks of it, as long as someone looks up and remembers its shape against the wind, it has not vanished completely. Not erased, not silenced, simply carried forward. There comes a point in your wandering when whispers and tavern talk no longer feel like enough. After too many years spent passing between towns and listening to stories traded like salt and wool, you begin to want something firmer underfoot. Not just the feeling of the banner's presence out there somewhere, floating unseen, but the knowledge of where it might truly rest. You tell yourself it isn't obsession, only curiosity, but there's weight behind every step as you find your way toward the old city libraries and royal archives. Places quieter than battlefields, but somehow heavier. The first archive you step into is in Tours, a tall stone building pressed between a cathedral and a row of merchant houses. The air inside is always cold, always carrying the scent of dust and candle wax. Shelves rise like cathedral columns around you, scrolls and bound volumes stacked so high that ladders lean permanently against the walls. The clerks here speak in whispers, their robes sweeping the floor, their quills scratching like slow rain against parchment. You move through the aisles with careful steps, searching for any trace of her. Not Joan herself this time, but the banner, the lists of relics, inventories from battle camps, records of captured standards. Anything. It isn't easy. The clerks know their shelves well. but their patience thins when you ask too many direct questions. Banners? They repeat, brows furrowing. Plenty of banners. The kings, the dukes. Which do you mean? You find yourself explaining again and again. The white banner, Joan's. Sometimes they nod slowly, as if recognizing the name, like an echo from far off. But mostly, they shake their heads. There's no official record, one says quietly. Not here, but you keep looking. In dusty ledgers listing the spoils of battle, you scan each line. One mentions captured flags. Another, broken lances collected after Orleans. But none describe the white banner. It's as if it was deliberately left out, or perhaps never written down at all. After tours, you make your way to Paris. The Royal Library there is larger, grander in its architecture, but no less quiet. The scribes wear finer robes, their pens dipped in brighter inks, but they carry the same guarded expressions. You spend hours seated beneath tall windows, streaked with dust and sun, thumbing through folios that smell like old wood and damp stone. Somewhere in a ledger titled Relics and Honors of the Crown, you find a single line that stops you cold. Banner, of unknown white cloth, origin disputed, secured following siege of Compiègne. No mention of Joan, no embroidery details. Just that, a white banner, secured, but no further notes. You show it to the archivist, a man with ink-stained fingers and sharp eyes behind narrow spectacles. He glances once, then shrugs. Could be anything, he says. Old banners fade. But that line sits in your chest like a stone. And so the search continues. From Paris to Reims, from dusty monastic libraries hidden behind thick iron gates to city archives where tax rolls and grain inventories sit alongside war records. Each time you hunt for scraps, lists of captured items, church inventories, descriptions of relics stored in locked chapels. You learn the patterns quickly. The older the archive, the less direct the references become. Early ledgers mention the maid's banner in passing. Later ones speak only of captured standards or miscellaneous linens of spiritual value. But the trail never fully vanishes. It weaves through centuries like thread through worn cloth. In Reims, you find yourself standing in a vaulted room lit only by tall, narrow windows. A clerk there, older than most, lets you examine an unmarked scroll sealed with wax. It lists items transferred between royal treasuries and church vaults. Near the end, one cloth standard, white, unadorned. You trace the line with your finger slowly. Could it be hers? Could it have been stripped of its gold, folded away until even its story wore thin? No clerk offers a clear answer, and perhaps no one knows anymore. But through all the searching, you begin to notice something else. A pattern beyond ink and lists. The more official the archive, the quieter the story becomes. The farther you go from dusty chapels and small-town markets, the less willing people are to say her name or describe her banner outright. It's as if history, when written down in royal records, prefers its ghosts half hidden. You realize, walking through these libraries, that there's a difference between memory and record. One lives in the air between people. The other lives in nooks locked behind iron gates. And yet, even within the archives, shadows remain. Half-erased names, smudged entries, folded pages left blank where a record might once have been written. One afternoon in Amiens, standing at the edge of a monastery scriptorium, you watch a young scribe lift a damaged volume from a shelf. Its spine is cracked, its pages stained with water and age. He opens it slowly, glancing at you as though unsure whether to speak. Inside, across 2 pages of half-legible script, there is a sketch, a rough drawing of a banner, white, with faint crosses traced in the margins. The scribe shrugs quietly. Found it last week. It wasn't cataloged. You ask if it can be copied, but the scribe only closes the book and slides it back onto the shelf, as if the image is not meant to leave the room. You don't argue, because by now you understand some things live better in shadows, not because they are forgotten, but because they remain unclaimed. Joan's banner does not belong in a royal vault, not pinned to a museum wall or folded into a king's treasure box. It belongs exactly where it is, in stories, in echoes, in half-seen sketches, in books left to gather dust. As you leave Amiens that evening, the sky stretched wide and pale above the rooftops. You carry no scrolls, no drawings, no proof. But as you step into the quiet air, you feel it all the same, like cloth brushing against your shoulder, like the snap of linen caught in a sudden breeze. The banner is still out there, maybe not in the way you'd first imagined, but present nonetheless. And some things you've come to learn don't need to be found to be real. In the years after the last fires cool and the road dust settles, you find yourself standing in places you never expected. Halls built not for kings or captains, but for memory. They call them museums now. Rows of relics set behind glass, old banners hung carefully beside polished plaques. You wander into one of these places in Paris, almost without thinking. The streets outside buzz with merchants and wagons, voices rising with the clatter of hooves on cobblestone. But inside the Musée des Trophies, there is only silence broken by the light, shuffle of visitors' boots, and the soft murmur of curators guiding the curious. The gallery stretches long and cold, lit by pale shafts of sunlight, filtering through tall windows. Along one wall, banners from past battles hang stiff and faded, their colors dulled by time. Most are simple things, royal standards, house sigils, the kind of flags lords carry for formality as much as for purpose. You walk slowly, eyes brushing over each piece of cloth until, near the far end, set apart from the rest as if by unspoken rule, there it is. A white banner, framed behind thick glass, mounted on dark wood. The cloth is pale as bone. Gold embroidery curls along its edges, so faint in places, it seems as though the thread might dissolve into dust if touched. A brass plaque beneath it states plainly, "Standard attributed to the Maid of Orleans. Provenance disputed." Those two final words weigh heavier than the polished frame or the iron hinges holding the glass in place. Provenance disputed. History's neat way of saying no one truly knows. You stand there longer than you mean to, boots planted firm on the smooth stone floor, arms crossed loosely over your chest. Around you, visitors drift past in quiet pairs, some pausing to glance at the banner, others moving on toward brighter displays of swords and armor. To them, perhaps it is just another relic, another scrap of cloth, faded by years and war. But for you, standing there with memories stretching back beyond these quiet halls, it is something else entirely. You remember the feel of wind catching white linen on a battlefield. Not this precise banner, perhaps, but one like it, lifted high above siege walls and muddy fields, cutting through smoke and sky with its impossible brightness. You remember the sound banners made, that quiet snap and ripple as the wind pulled against cloth, the kind of sound that kept men's feet moving forward when fear threatened to hold them still. And now, here it sits behind silent glass. You glance toward two clerks standing near a tall window, their voices low but clear enough to catch. One is younger, papers clutched in hand, eyes sharp behind thin spectacles. The other speaks slower, older, his words deliberate. Could be a chapel copy, the younger says, his tone cool and certain. Something made after the fact, to honor her memory. Or it's the original, the elder replies, voice quieter but steadier. Taken from the field, hidden, preserved. Neither speaks like someone absolutely sure. Neither can. You've spent enough years listening to such debates in dusty archives and candlelit chapels to know how they always end, with shrugging shoulders and quiet uncertainty. But as you look back at the banner, you cannot shake the sense that there is something real in it, not just in the fabric or the thread, but in the shape of it. The curve of the cloth where it hangs, the fold caught forever in the glass frame, as though it remembers being pulled by wind long past. It does not feel like a copy. Not to you. That's the trouble with relics. History prefers certainty, prefers lists and sealed documents. But some truths live between lines too faint to ink. You've seen the quiet gaps in monastery ledgers, the smudged entries in royal inventories, where someone once wrote banner, white, and left it at that. Things slip between record and memory. As you step closer, studying the embroidery, you catch a glimpse of faint figures traced along the border, too worn now to make out clearly. Saints, perhaps, or angels. You remember hearing once that Joan's banner bore images like that. Michael, Catherine, Margaret, saints she claimed spoke to her in visions. Here, those shapes remain just visible, like ghosts caught in silk. You wonder as you stand there if this cloth truly saw Orleans, if it truly flew above Compiègne, or if it was woven later, stitched by hands that never saw battle, crafted instead from the need to remember. But standing there in that moment, the difference feels less important than it once did. Whether or not this is the very same banner, it has carried the weight of her story now. That weight settles into every crease, every thread, until the cloth becomes more than cloth. As you turn slowly away from the case, footsteps soft on the stone floor, you hear a voice nearby, a mother guiding her child along the row of relics. The child asks in a small, curious voice, "Is that really hers?" The mother pauses, then answers with a gentle smile, "That's how the story goes." You carry that line with you as you leave the gallery and step back out into the bright noise of Paris. Horses clatter past. Merchants call their wares. But somewhere above it all, in the open air beyond the rooftops, you can almost picture it again. That shape of white and gold rising against the sky. Banner or copy, real or legend. It does not matter now, because the shape endures. The memory endures. There is a quiet moment on the road south of Chinon when you stop walking, boots planted in dry earth, and realize something that has been following you for years without your notice. The wind moves gently through the tall grasses at your sides. The sun is low, casting long golden shadows across fields left fallow, now that peace has held long enough for rest to matter. And as you stand there, watching linen on a distant clothesline ripple like a pale flag in the breeze, it settles into you like the weight of a hand placed on your shoulder. The banner was never just cloth. All the years you spent chasing it, from chapel altars to museum galleries, from scriptoriums, and dusty archives to half-remembered stories told by old soldiers, you had been looking for something tangible, something you could point to and say, "There, that is what it was." But as you stand beneath the wide French sky, the horizon stretching in every direction, like an endless wall of light and air, you understand now that the truth isn't pinned beneath glass or locked behind cathedral gates. It lives here, in the silence. You think back to the first time you saw it, not folded in a frame or whispered about in a tavern, but raised high above a field streaked with mud and ash. Back then, it had been everything. Not just a sign of Joan's command or her authority, but something simpler and heavier. A reason to move forward when your legs wanted to give out. A shape to focus on when the air grew too thick with smoke and arrows to see the horizon. It wasn't embroidered saints or golden thread that made it matter. It was the fact that it was there, always there. Joan carried it because it meant something larger than her voice, larger than her sword. It meant faith, but not only in God or in battle. Faith in moving forward, one step at a time, no matter how dark the sky grew. Faith that there was something ahead beyond the next ridge, something waiting beyond the next charge. You remember the way soldiers moved when they saw it, how tired men would straighten just a little, how a captain's voice would steady itself, how even those too wounded to fight would lift their eyes to watch it pass. It wasn't about victory or glory. It wasn't about banners planted on castle walls. It was about not standing still. That was what the banner meant all along. Not a symbol of Joan herself, though she carried it. Not even a symbol of France, though it flew for her king. It was the shape of persistence made real. A strip of linen, white against the sky, that told everyone below it to keep moving forward, even when there was no clear path. Now, standing on this quiet road, boots worn thin, hands rough with years, you know why no one could ever quite pin it down in a ledger. Why historians debated its last resting place. Why every chapel priest claimed a different attic or altar as its final home. Because it wasn't meant to have one. Some things aren't supposed to be locked in glass or folded away in scrolls. Some things live best when they drift, half seen, half remembered, carried in the wind between villages and voices. And perhaps that is why even now, decades after Joan's trial, you can still hear her name in marketplaces. Still see the curve of pale cloth in paintings long faded. Still catch the weight of her banner in the rhythm of chapel bells and the rustle of harvest fields. You pass through towns that never saw her walk their streets, and yet speak of her as if she had. Children chasing each other with sticks call their game by her name. Merchants fold linen carefully, murmuring as they tie off bundles, as if the fabric itself carries memory. And in quiet chapels, when the candles burn low, you sometimes catch sight of white cloth draped above the altar, not always embroidered, not always official, but they're all the same. A shape in the silence, a reminder. One evening in a village near Orleans, you sit beside an old soldier by the fire. His hair is thin and gray, his hands scarred from years of service. You don't speak much at first. There's no need. After enough years, silence becomes its own kind of conversation. But as the fire burns down, the man glances your way and says, as if picking up a thread left from days long past, "You ever carry a banner?" You shake your head slowly. "Only followed one." He nods once. That's the thing, isn't it? It's not about who holds it. It's about keeping it in sight. That line stays with you, long after the fire dies. Long after the roads stretch on again beneath your boots. Long after the last scribe sets down his pen and the last museum closes its doors for the night. Because that's what the banner meant all along. Not Joan, not saints, not kings. It meant following something you couldn't quite hold, but could always see. And as long as someone looks up into the wind, searching for that shape against the sky, it hasn't truly disappeared. Not erased, not forgotten. Simply carried forward in quieter ways, through fields left to rest after harvest, through bells that ring without fanfare at dusk, through linen folded carefully by hands that remember even if the voice does not speak the name aloud. The banner lives in moments like these. In the flicker of a candle, in the steady rhythm of footsteps on a road where banners once waved, in the silent agreement shared between those who remember what it meant to follow something greater than themselves. Yet while her banner carried the weight of battlefields and the hopes of soldiers, there were always places where that world felt far away. Places where candles burned, not for saints, but for ceremony. Where voices rose not in battle cries, but in quiet conversation over wine and carefully arranged platters. Life at the French royal court unfolded alongside Joan's journey, its rhythm untouched by mud and fire, shaped instead by silk and etiquette, gold-threaded garments, and measured words spoken beneath gilded ceilings. It is toward those quieter halls and shaded gardens that we now turn, stepping softly into the life of a French royal court during her time. The first thing you notice when stepping through the carved archways into the French royal court is not the color of the banners, nor the scent of burning candles that lingers in the air, but the way sound changes. It is not the roar of soldiers or the clash of armor anymore. Here, sound moves differently. It becomes soft and deliberate. Footsteps fall in quiet rhythm upon polished stone, softened by carpets woven in patterns of deep blue and gold. Voices lower themselves into murmurs that never rise above the level of careful control. Even the rustling of silk garments feels subdued, an intentional quiet meant to keep everything in its proper order. You walk slowly along the polished floors, boots muted by the weave beneath your feet. Every surface seems to shine in this place, floors buffed until they reflect candlelight like a mirror. Walls draped in tapestries of bright color, depicting saints, kings, battles won long before any living man could recall them clearly. There is a coldness to it all, not in temperature, but in atmosphere. Where once you stood ankle-deep in mud and smoke, you now walk through halls where each word, each glance, each movement is carefully measured. In these corridors, there is no rushing, no urgency. The pages who move past, you carry scrolls tied with silk ribbon. The courtiers stroll rather than stride. And everywhere, there is an undercurrent of unspoken rules that no one dares to break. You pause near a tall window, overlooking the central courtyard. From here, you watch nobles gathered in a long hall beneath banners embroidered in gold thread. They stand in clusters around heavy tables draped with dark fabric, their heads bent close together. You catch fragments of conversation, the negotiation of border lines, the tax rights of certain lords, shipments of wine from the southern regions. Each word feels quiet but heavy, as though even the smallest phrase could shift the balance of power if spoken too loudly or at the wrong time. Unlike the camps you once knew, where orders were shouted across fire-lit tents and decisions made beneath the crash of hammers striking iron, power here moves in quieter ways. It slips between folded letters sealed with wax. It passes through small gestures, a glance exchanged across a table, a cup of wine offered or declined. It isn't less dangerous than war. It's only hidden. And in the midst of all this, what strikes you most is how little space Joan's name seems to occupy. Once, perhaps, she had been whispered about here in shadowed corners, a curiosity, a figure too large to ignore. But now her story feels like something draped in cloth and tucked carefully away, present only in silence. Yet, if you look closely, there are signs. A brooch shaped like a white cross, pinned to a courtier's sleeve. A page tying scrolls with plain linen ribbon, rather than the expected silk. Symbols so subtle, they might be missed by someone who did not know what to look for. But you know. You see the quiet persistence of memory in these small things. Later in the afternoon, you step into the central hall, where the king holds court beneath a canopy of cloth, so fine it catches light like a sheet of gold leaf. Charles VII sits upon his throne, his robes heavy with embroidery, a thin crown resting lightly on his brow. His expression is that of a man long practiced at remaining calm, patient, unreadable, mildly curious as noble after noble approaches with gifts and requests. From your place along the edge of the chamber, you watch as courtiers present polished shields, jewel-encrusted daggers, finely woven tapestries depicting familiar battles. Each offering is accepted with a quiet nod, recorded carefully by a scribe whose quill never slows. And yet, through all of it, the weight of Joan's name is absent. The silence feels deliberate. It is not erasure. The court does not deny its past, but it buries it under layers of ritual and quiet formality. Joan's victories have become clean lines in history books now, tucked away in royal archives, no longer spoken of as living memory. In the gardens that stretch beyond the halls, you walk beneath arching oaks and rows of trimmed hedges. Marble statues stand beneath the weight of years, pale from sun and rain. Courtiers pass by in pairs, their laughter too carefully contained to echo. Servants sweep leaves into neat piles, each movement as practiced as a soldier polishing armor. As you pause near a marble bench, you overhear a lady in pale blue speak to her companion. Her voice is low, but it carries just enough for you to hear. "The maid's trial," she says softly. Such a strange chapter. Hard to imagine it now. Her companion only nods, and their steps continue, slow and measured beneath the canopy of leaves. Here, in this place, Joan is not forgotten but distanced, her name placed at a remove, woven into tapestries rather than shouted from ramparts. Court life demands such careful shaping of memory. It smooths out the rough edges. It folds banners neatly into vaults and replaces them with silk draperies embroidered with royal symbols. At the heart of it all lies a simple truth. Battlefields may decide the outcome of a war, but royal courts decide how that war is remembered. Here, wars become paintings hung on walls. Victories become lists of dates inscribed in fine script. The living pulse of it all, the mud, the banners, the voices raised in prayer or in fear, is softened into something more comfortable. Yet even so, as you walk through those marble halls, the echo of Joan's banner seems to hover just beyond the corner of your eye. Not visible, not displayed, but they're all the same. In the flicker of candlelight on a polished sword hilt, in the scent of wax and parchment, in the slow, steady rhythm of footsteps on stone floors worn smooth by centuries of deliberate pacing. Silks and swords, silence and politics. Together, they form the real weight of court life, not louder than battle, but just as sharp. It does not take long, once you step into the royal court, to realize there are rules here that no one speaks aloud. No formal lists pinned to walls. No clear, shouted orders as on the battlefield. And yet, there is a pattern in every step and gesture so precise that it might as well be etched into the very stones beneath your boots. Every glance, every pause before a word, carries meaning. You can feel it as soon as you walk the polished floors, a kind of quiet weight pressing in from all sides. Not the weight of fear, exactly, but of endless, invisible expectation. You first notice it fully during the midday meal. In the grand hall beneath ceilings painted with stars and saints, courtiers gather in ranks as deliberate as any military formation. Tables stretch in perfect lines beneath gleaming chandeliers. Each chair has its place according to rank and favor. The king's closest at his right hand, powerful nobles further along, petitioners and lesser guests at the far edges. It is no accident where a man sits here. Every position is chosen, calculated. There is no casual taking of seats, no disorder. And the servants, pages, and stewards move through it all like part of a finely tuned machine. Plates appear and vanish. Cups are filled, then cleared away. And the sharpest sound you hear in that grand hall is the quiet scrape of a knife against a gilded plate. But beneath that surface calm, you begin to see what lies underneath. A man lifts his cup too soon and draws a frown from the king's steward. A lady lowers her gaze a moment too late and earns a whisper from her companion. Nothing here is free of scrutiny. It feels, as you watch, like a hall full of blades sheathed in silk. Everyone's posture is perfect. Everyone's words flow smooth as oil. But you can sense how closely those words and movements are monitored. How easily one misstep could become a scandal or worse. A dropped spoon here carries more danger than a dropped sword in battle. There are no visible weapons in this room, but you have no doubt the court's quiet sharpness could cut deeper than any dagger. And it isn't just the seating or the serving. It's the clothing, too. Courtiers wear etiquette like armor. Every thread on their bodies sends a message. Brocade lined with golden thread might signify a family's closeness to the crown. A certain shade of blue might mark mourning or alliance with another house. Even the length of a lady's sleeve can whisper things a soldier would never notice, except now, after enough time spent watching, you do. Once, standing near a tall window, you step aside for a line of ladies passing by. Their gowns brush the floor in careful waves, silks layered like the banners you once followed into battle. Their eyes flick over you as they pass, not rudely, not directly, but sharply enough to leave no doubt that they are measuring everything from your boots to your tunic's cut. One of them lingers on your face for a beat too long, then looks away as if nothing had happened. That's how it works here. Small tests, constant measuring. You begin to see how exhausting this quiet battle must be. On the battlefield, things were simpler. If a man stood against you, you raised your blade. If he knelt, you spared him. Here, a man's fall comes through a single poorly timed smile, a bow made at the wrong moment, a glance misinterpreted. It requires a kind of focus that never loosens, even for a moment. Slowly, you find yourself learning how low to bow to which noble, how long to hold a gaze before it turns dangerous, how to stand in a way that shows respect without seeming subservient. It is a kind of drill, like practicing sword strokes again and again until muscle and mind remember together. And through all of it, you can't help but think of Joan. You picture her walking these same halls, likely in plain linen and armor rather than silk, her banner held high in hand. How strange she must have seemed here, too bright, too sharp for this world of muted colors and folded glances. You wonder if she ever tried to learn these quiet steps, or if she simply ignored them, moving through the court as she did through the battlefield, direct, unsparing. Her name is not spoken now. You listen closely for it and find only silences. Yet even so, you notice quiet echoes. A scroll tied not with gold ribbon, but with plain white cloth. A tapestry tucked behind a column, showing a faceless figure in white, lifting a banner against a painted sky. Her memory is buried beneath layers of etiquette, like a blade hidden beneath too many silken wrappings. Later in the afternoon, you watch from a quiet corner as the courtiers gather again, this time not for a meal, but for the slower dance of political conversation. They stand in small clusters beneath high-arched windows, voices low, gestures careful. No one steps out of line. There is no rush. Only the steady rhythm of glances, nods, and words spoken with such care that you wonder how long it took them all to learn this particular battlefield. It strikes you then, as clear as anything you learned under arms, that court life is its own form of war. There are no drums, no horns, but every word is a step in a march. Every glance is an attack or a shield. Victories here are won not with charge and clash, but with patience and silence. And through it all, the pressure never lifts. It sits on every shoulder, as heavy as any suit of mail. Every man and woman you see wears it, not as a burden they show, but as a weight pressed beneath their smiles and measured tones. Here in the heart of the court, silence is the sharpest weapon of all. When evening falls over the French royal court, the rhythm of the day does not slow as you might expect. The sharp silences of political discussion, the careful maneuvering of courtiers across marble floors, none of that softens. It simply shifts shape. Where midday meals are arranged in quiet rows, lit by high windows and the flicker of pale candlelight, the evening feast becomes something else entirely. It is louder in its own way, fuller, brighter, but beneath the surface, it remains as tightly controlled as any council meeting or military review. The great hall, now lit not by soft afternoon light, but by hundreds of candles and hanging chandeliers, seems almost to glow. Gold leaf catches the flame's reflection on every surface. Musicians in the gallery play soft notes on lutes and viols, weaving a background hum of sound meant to fill the room without overpowering it. And yet, as you step through the arched doorway and pause near the back, you feel that same unspoken weight settle over your shoulders. The weight of etiquette, of quiet expectation, as constant here as at any council table. The tables are arranged in perfect lines again, but the colors have changed. Where midday featured pale linen and simple goblets, evening brings out deep blue cloth embroidered with golden thread, silver plates polished until they gleam like mirrors, and wine poured from crystal decanters instead of earthen jugs. The food is finer too. You notice it immediately. Roasted meats perfumed with sprigs of thyme and rosemary, Platters of glazed fruits stacked in careful pyramids, custards scented with honey and spice. The smell is enough to make the mouth water. And yet, no one eats as if they are hungry. That is the first thing that stands out. Plates are filled, certainly. Servants glide past, setting silver dishes before each guest with hands as steady as clockwork. But the courtiers themselves pick at their food in measured bites. A sliver of meat here, a single fig sliced with a knife, so sharp the blade barely seems to move. No one tears bread or reaches too quickly for a cup of wine. It is all controlled, as if the feast exists less to feed hunger and more to display abundance without need. You find yourself standing beside a column near the edge of the room, watching as the pattern repeats across every table. Conversation flows in quiet, steady currents, laughter here, a soft murmur there, but the food remains largely untouched. Only the servants seem to move with true energy, stepping forward to clear plates that are more decoration than sustenance, refilling goblets that no one seems in a rush to drain. At first, you think perhaps the court has simply eaten earlier, or that the meal is more ceremony than sustenance. But as you listen, you hear the truth in the words exchanged between two lesser lords seated near the end of the hall. It's not about hunger, one says, voice pitched low, more breath than speech. It's about restraint. Appearance, the other agrees with a slow nod. No one wants to look desperate. That, you realize, is what sets these feasts apart from the meals you once knew. In the camps where soldiers gathered around smoky fires, food was a need answered with directness. Hard bread torn in rough halves, stew ladled from iron pots into chipped bowls. Hunger ruled those meals. There was no time for pretense. Here, hunger is hidden. To eat too much would suggest need. To drink too heavily would suggest weakness. Everything must appear balanced, perfect, effortless. You notice the king seated at the head of the hall, Charles VII himself, his plate set before him with equal care. Even he takes only small bites. A sliver of fish, a sip of wine. His expression remains calm, unreadable. Around him, the faces of his closest advisors mirror that same controlled grace. And yet, as you watch, you cannot help but wonder how many of these men and women feel the same quiet ache in their stomachs that any soldier would feel after a long day's march. They do not show it. That is the art in it. The court teaches not only how to move, how to speak, but how to eat as if eating were not a necessity at all. Later in the evening, as the plates are cleared and the musicians shift to slower, softer melodies, you find yourself standing near one of the open windows along the outer wall. The air is cool. Beyond the gardens, torches flicker like small stars pinned to earth. A page passes behind you, carrying a tray stacked with untouched pastries, their sugared surfaces catching the light. You think of Joan then, of how she might have looked in a place like this, seated at a table where no one eats their fill, where the battle is not against hunger or cold, but against the appearance of needing anything at all. You cannot quite picture her here. Her presence would cut through these silk-lined walls like a banner unfurling in a storm. And perhaps that is why her name is not spoken during these feasts. You listen closely, ears tuned between the soft music and quieter conversations, but no one mentions her. Not directly. Her victories have been folded into the same polished layers as everything else. Recognized, perhaps, but set aside. Too direct for a world built on subtlety. As the evening stretches on, more wine is poured. Still, no one drinks to excess. Toasts are made, but even the loudest cheer never quite breaks the surface tension of the room. It is all controlled, carefully measured. The court knows its balance and holds it steady. Finally, as the last notes from the musicians fade and the candles burn lower, the nobles begin to rise in small, deliberate groups. No sudden rush to the door. No collapse into sleep, as soldiers might after a long march. Even the end of the feast is staged, measured, graceful, restrained. You watch as the hall empties slowly, servants moving in as soon as each table is cleared, polishing silver and folding linens with the same care as soldiers tending weapons. And as you step back into the corridor beyond the great hall, boots echoing softly against the stone, you carry with you the weight of what these feasts truly mean. They are not about food, not about comfort. They are about showing that hunger is something other men feel, men beyond these walls. Hunger belongs to soldiers, to peasants, to those who do not move with silken grace or speak in layered phrases. In the heart of the court, even the most basic needs become part of the performance. A quiet battle fought not with swords, but with silence, patience, and control. The royal galleries stretch long and quiet, their arched ceilings echoing with the soft weight of footsteps and carefully measured conversation. Tall windows cast shifting patterns of light across the polished floors, while tapestries and portraits line the walls, their colors softened by years of candle smoke and quiet observation. At first glance, these halls seem like places meant for silence, corridors for solitary walks and quiet reflection. Yet within a few days, it becomes clear that the galleries are anything but silent. Whispers flow through them like a second kind of air, quiet currents of words sliding between polished marble columns and gilt-framed paintings, as constant and deliberate as the tick of a clock. You notice it early, walking slowly along the gallery's edge one morning, boots softened by woven rugs. The hour is early, the sun just beginning to rise, and the hall feels almost empty. But then, from behind a tall statue of St. Louis, two voices drift into the space where you stand. One speaks, the other murmurs in reply, then both fall silent again as if nothing had been said at all. Their words are not meant for you, yet they carry clearly in the wide space between stone walls. It is then that you understand. The gallery is not merely a place for walking. It is a place for quiet negotiation, for measured exchanges carried out in soft tones beneath the gaze of painted kings and carved saints. Over the following days, as you pass back and forth through the South Gallery, you begin to hear the pattern more clearly. The whispers are never accidental. Two courtiers pausing beneath a tall window speak in half sentences about estate matters, whose lands will be granted, whose family name might be erased from royal favor. Another pair stand before a tapestry depicting a grand hunt, discussing the movement of armies not yet announced in the Great Hall. Always the voices are quiet, always incomplete, as though full statements would be too heavy, too sharp for these polished walls. The paintings that line the gallery form their own kind of conversation. Portraits of past kings in gilded armor, saints with bright halos, battle scenes where banners stretch toward painted skies. One in particular draws your eye each time you pass it. A tall panel near the northern end of the hall. It shows a battlefield beneath storm-dark clouds, a city wall rising faint in the background, and near the center, a white and gold banner lifting against the wind. There is no name beneath it, no identifying mark. But those who know the story do not need a label. You pause before it more than once, eyes tracing the curve of painted cloth, the imagined shimmer of gold embroidery. And as you stand there, voices move behind you. She wore armor, did she not? One murmurs in a voice as quiet as turning pages. Strange that. She did. Another replies softly after a pause. But no one speaks of that here. That is the rhythm of the gallery. Joan's name is never spoken outright, yet it lingers beneath the surface, moving through the halls like a shadow, barely seen in candlelight. Her story has been folded into the walls, into the silence between footsteps, into the half-phrases exchanged beneath painted saints. You begin to observe more closely. The courtiers who walk the gallery do so with care. They move in pairs, never in large groups. Their timing is deliberate. One pair moving forward as another steps aside. No one ever stands too long in one place, nor moves too quickly. It is a dance of shadows and light, learned through long practice. Young pages are taught early, that the gallery is no place for idleness. To pause too long is to draw attention, and in the royal court, attention is often a sharper weapon than any sword. As you continue your quiet walks, you hear sharper whispers from time to time, words that catch your ear more clearly. A noble's fall from favor spoken about in murmured tones. The quiet shifting of an alliance hinted at with a single phrase. A marriage arranged without the king's full blessing. These things move through the gallery long before they reach official notice. It becomes clear that real power in the court does not always rest in the throne room or council chambers. Often, it begins here, between tall windows and silent statues. One afternoon, as the light turns gold and long shadows stretch across the floor, you pause again before the white banner painted in stormy skies. Behind you, two courtiers pass, their voices low and steady. You hear a phrase, sharp and clear beneath the softness. The maid's banner, locked in the archives now, they say, they do not stop. Their footsteps continue down the hall, voices fading into the distance, but the words linger in the air as surely as candle smoke. You do not speak. You do not move to follow. Yet that single sentence settles into you with a weight as real as any blade on your hip. Another piece of the story, folded away like the banner itself. It is here, in the gallery, that such truths slip from mouth to ear, caught only by those who know how to listen. With each passing day, you become more certain. This is the heart of the court's true battle, not in grand speeches or public declarations, not in the king's formal decrees, but here, where power flows like a slow, quiet river beneath the surface. A glance exchange beneath a painted saint, a phrase left unfinished but understood fully. The gallery holds these things, preserves them as surely as it preserves its gilded frames and worn marble floors. That evening, as the last light fades and candles are lit in tall stands along the walls, you walk the length of the gallery one final time. Your boots move slowly, steps careful, as you let each painting pass beside you like an old companion. The kings, the saints, the battles. And always, near the end, a white banner painted against a sky the color of rain-heavy clouds. No one says Joan's name aloud here, not openly. But her story walks these halls as surely as you do. It echoes in the silences. It hums beneath the soft rustle of silks. It lingers in the air like music barely remembered, never fully fading. And in that quiet, deliberate space, you understand. The gallery is not a place of decoration. It is a place of memory, shaped by whispers and half-seen shadows. The court's sharpest truths move here, not in shouted commands, but in quiet steps and measured glances. The battlefield may have been left behind, but here, in the long corridors lit by golden lamps and pale moonlight, the battle continues. It simply wears different colors. There are moments in the life of the court when the hallways fall into a gentler rhythm, when the weight of silent politics eases just slightly, and the grand machinery of etiquette and whispers slows its turning. It is in those quieter hours that certain figures emerge, moving through the same polished corridors as nobles and pages, yet walking to a rhythm entirely their own. Not bound by rank or title in the same strict sense, yet each carrying a kind of weight that no silk robe or jeweled ring can quite match. Among them, three stand out most clearly in your memory: the priest, the knight, and the poet. The court, in its endless turning, creates spaces for such figures, not in the grand halls where power displays itself in cloth of gold and ceremonial swords, but in the margins where truth finds room to breathe. Here, away from the careful choreography of state occasions and the measured dance of alliances, these three men exist as something more essential, keepers of what cannot be bargained away or forgotten entirely. You first notice the priest during a morning service in the chapel adjoining the southern gallery. The court's chapel is smaller than you expected, tall-ceilinged and rich with gilded carvings, yet designed more for intimacy than grandeur. A single row of tall candles flickers near the altar, casting warm light onto polished wood and cold stone. The windows, narrow and deep set, filter the morning sun into long beams that catch the incense smoke and transform it into something almost solid, almost touchable. The priest is an older man, his robe simple compared to the layered silks worn by the nobles who occasionally attend his services. His hair has gone silver at the temples, and his hands, when he raises them in blessing, bear the slight tremor of years spent in prayer and study. His voice carries not the practiced smoothness of a courtier, but something steadier, quieter. It is the kind of voice made for prayer and confession, rather than for public proclamation. A voice that has learned to speak to God and to the human heart with equal measure. He speaks Latin, of course, as all royal chaplains do, but there is something in the cadence that makes you linger. His words are not rushed. They do not race ahead of themselves in the way sermons sometimes do when offered only for formality's sake. He speaks as if he believes someone is listening, not just the scattered nobles who attend for appearance's sake, but someone beyond the gilded walls and painted ceiling. And from the way, a few courtiers pause in the shadows just beyond the chapel doors, heads slightly bowed, faces unreadable. You sense that others hear it too. The priest's daily routine becomes visible to you through patient observation. He rises before dawn, moving through the gallery corridors when they are empty save for the occasional servant lighting candles or sweeping yesterday's dust from the floors. His morning prayers are said alone, in the gray light that precedes sunrise, his voice a low murmur that seems to settle into the stones themselves. During the day, he moves between the chapel and the small chamber that serves as his study, where shelves of books line the walls and a single desk bears the weight of correspondence from distant monasteries and fellow priests. Later, as you pass him in the gallery, he walks with his hands folded neatly, eyes lowered, yet his steps do not seem hurried, nor do they carry the hesitations common to many who move through the court's quieter halls. There is a weight in his silence, a patience different from the calculated quiet of politics. It is the silence of a man who knows how to wait, whether for an answer to prayer or for time itself to unfold its long pattern. You observe him during confession, though you do not intrude upon the sacred privacy of those moments. Still, you can see the way nobles emerge from the small chamber behind the altar, some with faces cleared of whatever burden they carried in, others with expressions more troubled than when they entered. The priest himself never shows any sign of what he has heard, maintaining the perfect discretion that his calling demands. Yet something in his manner suggests that he carries these secrets not as burdens, but as sacred trusts, held safe within the fortress of his vows. The knight, in contrast, moves differently. You notice him first during a midday gathering in the outer courtyard, where nobles watch the younger squires train in mock duels. The sun beats down on the cobblestones, and the sound of wooden swords clashing echoes off the surrounding walls. Ladies fan themselves in the shade of the galleries, their bright silks a stark contrast to the practical leather and mail of the training yard. His armor is not as polished as those worn in ceremonial parades. It bears dents and scratches, edges softened by use rather than display. The metal has the gray patina of iron that has seen weather and wear, and the leather straps show the kind of softening that comes from years of buckling and unbuckling. His cloak is plain, marked only by a single badge stitched near the shoulder. A white cross barely larger than a coin, its edges frayed slightly from age and handling. Where many knights in the court speak loudly, boasting of their deeds over wine and elaborating their adventures for the entertainment of ladies, this man stands back from the crowd. His arms remain crossed over his chest, and his weathered face bears the kind of stillness that comes from having seen too much to need to speak of it. His gaze follows each clash of wooden swords and shield strikes, not with the detached amusement of a noble watching a pageant, but with the close attention of someone who remembers what it feels like to stand on the line himself. When the swords were sharp, and the stakes were life and death. You hear his name spoken only in half-phrases, a veteran from the northern campaigns. One lady murmurs behind a folded fan. Rarely speaks, another adds, but the king trusts his judgment. The fragments of his story emerge slowly, like pieces of a mosaic. Battles fought in distant fields, cities defended against siege, winter campaigns where survival itself was victory enough. There are mentions of commendations, of rewards declined, of a man who served not for glory, but for something harder to name. His interactions with the younger knights and squires reveal more than any formal conversation might. He does not instruct them directly, but his presence changes their behavior. They stand straighter when he watches, strike with more precision, show more respect to their opponents. It is as if his silence itself teaches them something about the weight of the weapons they carry and the oaths they will someday swear. And indeed, as the training ends and the squires bow low, the knight turns without fanfare, stepping back through the archway into the gallery, disappearing into shadow as quietly as he came. His departure leaves a subtle change in the air, a sense that something important has withdrawn, leaving the courtyard somehow less substantial than it was before. The poet, of the three, is the most elusive. You catch sight of him not in the grand halls or the formal gatherings, but in the smaller spaces tucked along the court's edges and alcoves near the library, seated with a slim volume resting on his knee. In quiet corners of the garden, where no music plays and no courtiers gather in deliberate clusters. He seems to exist in the spaces between the court's official functions, appearing when the grand performances pause and disappearing when the formal ceremonies resume. His clothing is simpler than most, though still marked by fine cloth and careful stitching. A ribbon tied at the collar, not for ornamentation, but to hold closed a shirt that has been mended more than once. Ink stains faint against pale cuffs, the permanent marks of a man who lives by the written word. His hands, when you glimpse them, bear the calluses of someone who has spent years holding a quill, and his fingers are often stained with fresh ink, as if he has just finished writing something important. His face carries the kind of stillness that suggests thought rather than calculation, and unlike most in the court, he seems content to listen rather than to speak. When conversations flow around him, he watches with the attention of someone gathering material, storing away turns of phrase and subtle gestures for future use. His eyes hold the particular alertness of those who see stories everywhere, who understand that the most powerful truths often hide in the smallest details. It is said, you hear, that he once wrote verses for the king's coronation, that he composed songs sung in Orleans when the city was reclaimed. The stories of his past drift through the court like music half-remembered, fragments of a reputation built on words that have outlived their original occasions. And though his name is not carved into stone or sewn into tapestries, the echoes of his work remain in the court's quieter corners, lines recited beneath breath by servants cleaning silver, melodies hummed by pages when they think no one listens. His workspace, when you glimpse it through an open door, reveals the tools of his trade. Sheets of parchment covered with careful script, quills trimmed to different points for different purposes, small bottles of ink in various shades. Books lie open beside half-finished poems, their pages marked with strips of cloth to hold his place. The room smells of parchment and ink, of the dust that settles on papers left too long undisturbed. One afternoon, passing through the southern gallery, you find the poet seated alone before the painting of the white banner. His hand rests lightly against the wooden bench beside him, fingers tracing patterns into the air as if writing a line that will never quite settle onto the page. His eyes follow the painted cloth as though searching for something just beyond sight, perhaps the words that might capture what the artist could only suggest in pigment and brushwork. The painting itself seems to hold his attention completely. The white banner in the image hangs limp in painted stillness, yet somehow suggests motion, as if a wind beyond the frame might at any moment set it flying. The artist has captured not just the fabric, but the idea of the banner, the weight of what it represented and the echo of what it might represent still. It strikes you, then, how these three men, the priest, the knight, and the poet, form their own kind of quiet balance within the court. Each moves beyond the formal steps of etiquette without ignoring them entirely. Each carries a weight different from that of dukes and lords, yet just as steady. They exist in the spaces between official functions, in the margins of power, yet their presence gives substance to the court's more elaborate performances. The priest offers stillness, the deep quiet of prayer and contemplation, the peace that comes from holding sacred things in sacred silence. The knight provides memory, the living reminder of sacrifice and service, of oaths kept and duties fulfilled without a claim. The poet brings voice, the power to transform experience into words that might outlast the moment that gave them birth. And woven through all three is the lingering thread of Joan's story. You hear it in the priest's measured prayers, which sometimes seem to pause at her name without speaking it, as if the syllables themselves require special reverence. You sense it in the knight's silent watchfulness, in the way he stands just a little straighter whenever a page ties a scroll with white ribbon instead of red, as if the color itself carries weight and meaning. You find it most clearly in the poet's words, phrases caught like breath in the air, never quite spoken aloud, but always present. A line about a flame that would not die, a verse about a banner lost and yet remembered. Together, they form a living echo of the things that the court itself tries to set aside. Amid silks and politics, measured steps, and whispered alliances, these three men move like quieter notes in a grand, complex song. Not the loudest, but the ones that linger long after the music is faded, the harmonies that give depth to the melody, the bass notes that ground the whole composition. And as you continue your slow walks through the galleries and courtyards, through chapel shadows and garden light, you find yourself following their paths more often than not, watching for the priest's steady step in the morning corridors, listening for the poet's low voice in the library alcoves, marking the knight's silent guard in the training yards and ceremonial halls. They are not legends, they are not monuments, but they are memory made real, walking reminders of what the court was built to serve and what it must never quite forget. And in a court where every glance and word must follow a careful script, their quiet presence speaks more clearly than any banner ever could, a testament to the truths that survive even when the world changes around them, even when the stories themselves become too dangerous to tell aloud. The French royal court, with all its silken layers and measured steps, continues to move as though nothing beyond its walls ever truly mattered. Day after day, the same rhythms unfold. The morning councils where advisors speak in hushed tones of taxation and trade agreements. The midday meals arranged in quiet rows where silver gleams against white linen. The slow parades of courtiers through the galleries, like ships navigating familiar waters. And through it all, there is a weight to what is not said, a silence that feels heavier than any bell or shouted name. For in all these corridors lined with gilded saints and painted kings, Joan of Arc's name has all but disappeared. The absence feels most profound in the throne room, where Charles VII holds court beneath tapestries depicting his ancestors' victories. Here, where petitioners bow low can speak of the realm's future, the very foundations of that future, the battles of Orleans and Patay, the march to Reims, have become unmentionable ghosts. The courtiers discuss harvests and marriages, trade routes and diplomatic alliances, as if these luxuries had always existed, as if they had not been carved from English occupation by a peasant girl's sword. At first, you expected to linger more openly. After all, it was through her victories that Charles VII reclaimed his crown. Through her banner that these halls remain French and not English. Yet as you walk the same polished floors, day after day, week after week, her story fades from daily speech as surely as dust settles into the corners of the tallest gallery windows. The marble beneath your feet was once cold with the fear of losing France itself. Now it reflects only the warm glow of countless candles, as if that fear had never existed. It isn't deliberate, not quite. No edict has been issued to erase her. No scroll pinned to the chapel door banning her memory. But there is a deliberate absence, nonetheless. Her figure does not appear in the great tapestries hung above the banquet hall, where other heroes of France are immortalized in gold thread and crimson silk. Her name does not pass the lips of noble ladies as they speak of family lines and royal gifts, their voices carrying easily through the scented air of the afternoon salons. Even among the paintings of past battles, the white banner remains anonymous, a symbol stripped of its bearer, a flag without its saint. The court moves around her legacy like a man walking carefully around a missing step, never acknowledging the gap directly. Conversations flow around the empty space where her name should be, like water finding its way around a stone. When young nobles speak of courage, they invoke ancient Romans or mythical knights. When the king's musicians compose new songs of triumph, they draw from classical tales or distant crusades. The immediate past, the living memory of transformation, remains carefully unspoken. You sense it most sharply during an evening feast, standing once again at the edge of the grand hall, watching as nobles raise their cups in slow, deliberate toasts. The crystal catches the light from 100 candles, throwing rainbow fragments across the assembled faces. One toast to the king's health, voices rising in practiced unison. Another to the fortunes of France, the words flowing like a familiar prayer. A third to the lineage of the crown, heads bowing in reverence to bloodlines and ancient privileges. But never once to the woman who made those things possible. Her absence sits in the air like a weight, pressing down just beyond reach. A silence that grows heavier with each passing toast. It is not forgetfulness. It is choice. The same kind of choice that arranges silver on a table or decides which color ribbon to tie around a royal decree. Joan's story does not fit the court's preference for clean lines and quiet control. Her fire was too bright, her voice too loud, her origins too humble for the delicate machinery of noble society. She had spoken to kings as an equal, claimed the divine authority over earthly power, died in flames that no amount of silk or gold could extinguish. And so, the court lets her name settle into quieter places. In chapel prayers whispered too softly for the record, in songs sung by servants in the kitchens after the day's work is done, in the margins of official histories where scribes might add a careful note. The younger courtiers, those who have known only peace and prosperity, move through the halls with an easy grace that speaks of security taken for granted. They have never seen English banners flying from French towers, never heard the sound of foreign voices giving orders in their native tongue. To them, the current order feels natural, inevitable, as if it had always been thus. They speak of fashion and philosophy, of hunting and poetry, while the foundation of their world, built on the back of a peasant girl's impossible faith, remains invisible beneath their feet. One morning, walking through the outer garden paths, while the dew still clings to the grass, you pause near a marble bench, where two older courtiers sit in quiet conversation. Their faces are marked with the lines of long service, men who have watched kings rise and fall, who remember the taste of fear and the sound of English boots on French stones. The garden around them blooms with careful precision, roses trained to climb in perfect arcs, herbs arranged in neat geometric patterns, but their eyes hold the memory of wilder times. And as you stand nearby, boots scuffing lightly against gravel, you catch a fragment of their words. "Do you remember?" one says slowly, voice rough with age. "The girl with the banner? Domremy's daughter?" The question hangs in the morning air, like mist. Birds sing in the carefully pruned trees, and somewhere in the distance, a fountain splashes steadily against stone. The older man's hands rest on his walking stick, knuckles white with memory. There is a long pause before the other answers, his voice carrying the weight of years spent learning what should and should not be said. Some things are better left in the past. That is all they say. And then they fall silent again, staring out across the still garden as if nothing had passed between them at all. But the words linger. They settle in the air like the scent of wax after a candle is snuffed, like the echo of a bell after the last note has faded. Some things are better left in the past. You realize then fully that Joan has become a story too difficult for the court to carry comfortably. Her rise, her trial, her death, they do not fit easily into the clean halls and measured dances. They disrupt the careful fiction that power flows naturally from bloodline and divine right, that common people cannot speak with the voice of God, that the world can be ordered and controlled by those who know their place within it. And so, rather than speak her name awkwardly, or twist her story into something smaller than it was, the court lets it fade. Not entirely, not completely, but enough that the younger pages walking the galleries know her only as a faint shape in a painting, or as a half-remembered line in an old song. Even the king does not mention her. Charles VII sits beneath his gold-embroidered canopy as always, receiving gifts and petitions, speaking with calm precision about matters of state and ceremony. But never once does his voice rise to recall the girl who crowned him, who knelt before him in that tent outside Orleans, and called him her dauphin when all the world said he was nothing. Whether from guilt or strategy, or simply the long passing of years, her place has been allowed to drift into shadow. Perhaps it is easier to rule when you do not daily confront the reminder that your crown was won by hands that never should have held a sword. And yet, as you walk through the court's quieter corners, you notice where her memory lingers still. In the chapel, a single candle lit before a white cross, its flame steady and small, but never allowed to die. In the smallest room of the royal library, a worn book left unsealed, its final page marked with a simple drawing of a banner, waving in the wind, drawn by what hand, you cannot say, but the ink is fresh enough to suggest someone still remembers. In the servants' quarters, where on cold nights, older women murmur prayers in a dialect from the north, shaping her name like a thread, woven through each quiet breath. It is not the court that remembers her now, not truly. It is the edges of the court, the places too small or too quiet for the weight of gold crowns and embroidered titles. The forgotten corners where practical faith still lives, where the story of an impossible girl doing impossible things remains not a historical curiosity, but a living truth. And perhaps you think as you stand once more in the long gallery before the painted white banner, that is as it should be. Joan was never meant for polished marble and whispered alliances. Her story lives better in wind and fire, in battle smoke and chapel bells, in the simple memory carried by those who walk not for display, but because there is a road ahead. You linger a little longer, boots still, breath quiet, eyes following the imagined curve of cloth painted against the stormy sky. The banner in the painting seems to move slightly in the flickering candlelight, as if touched by a breeze that exists only in memory. Outside, the evening bells begin to ring softly, calling the courtiers to vespers. Their footsteps echo down the halls once more, measured and composed, the sound of a world that has learned to move on. But as you turn away from the gallery, your steps feel lighter, not hurried, but steady. The kind of pace meant not for display, but for moving forward. And with each quiet step, the halls growing dim behind you, it feels like the right moment now to let the story settle into its final rest, leaving these walls behind and letting silence carry us gently toward the close of the night. And that's where we'll leave it for tonight. From the muddy roads marched by Joan's followers to the cold stone walls of Rouen prison. From the battlefields veiled in smoke to the quiet gardens of the French royal court. A long, slow walk through the silken halls and forgotten banners woven into the layers of history. If you're still awake, thanks for sticking with me all the way to the end. And if you drifted off somewhere between the rain-soaked banners and the whispered gallery conversations, that's perfectly fine too. That's really the whole idea. If you enjoyed this slower, sleep-friendly journey through the past, feel free to like the video and subscribe for more. And as always, let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight and what time it was when you pressed play. It's always quietly fascinating seeing where in the world these late-night history walks are reaching. For now, I'll let the echo of boots on stone fade, the soft clatter of goblets grow quieter, and the flickering candles in the galleries dim one by one. Sleep well, and I'll see you next time.